The first bullet took Corporal Martinez through the throat before anyone heard the shot. That was the thing about professional snipers. By the time you heard the crack of the rifle, someone was already dead. The sound traveled slower than the metal that killed you. Physics. Cold, indifferent physics. The universe did not care about fairness or justice or the young wife waiting back home. The universe only cared about velocity and trajectory and the terrible mathematics of death. Martinez had been standing in a doorway, scanning the buildings to the north with his binoculars, doing exactly what he had been trained to do. One moment he was alive, breathing, thinking about the baby that would be born in 4 months. The next moment he was falling, his hands reaching for the wound that had already killed him, his blood painting the concrete floor in patterns that no one would ever study or understand. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Shaw watched Martinez crumple to the ground, watched the young man's hands go to his neck like he was trying to hold his life inside his body, watched the blood pump between his fingers in thick arterial spurts that painted the concrete a deep, terrible red. 23 years old, married 8 months, wife pregnant with their first child back in San Diego. Shaw would have to write that letter, if he survived long enough to write anything at all. Contact! Contact! Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Webb's voice cut through the cab, but it was useless information. They all knew there was contact. They just could not see where it was coming from. The Packard district of Detroit stretched around them like the skeleton of some great beast that had died long ago and been left to rot. Abandoned factories rose toward a gray October sky, their windows shattered, their walls crumbling, their interiors dark and full of shadows. This had once been the heart of American manufacturing, the place where the automobile had transformed from luxury to necessity, where working men and women had built the machines that built America. Now it was a graveyard of rust and broken dreams, a monument to promises unkept and futures abandoned. The Packard automotive plant itself sprawled across 35 acres of urban wasteland, its massive buildings connected by elevated walkways that now hung broken and dangerous over streets that had not seen traffic in decades. Graffiti covered the lower walls, the work of artists and vandals who had turned decay into a canvas. Trees grew through collapsed roofs, nature slowly reclaiming what industry had stolen a century before. And somewhere in this concrete jungle, 17 professional killers were hunting Shaw's men like animals. They moved through the shadows with a patience that spoke of training and discipline. They chose their shots with care that spoke of expertise. They killed with efficiency that spoke of experience. This was not chaos. This was choreography, and Shaw's Marines were dying to a dance they could not see. Another shot. Private First Class Donovan spun and fell, clutching his shoulder. He screamed, a high, raw sound that echoed off the dead buildings and came back distorted, multiplied, impossible to trace. Where? Shaw shouted into his radio. Somebody give me a direction. Silence. Then Sergeant Webb's voice, tight with frustration. Sir, we got nothing. Thermal is blank. Drones show empty windows. They're ghosts. Ghosts, Shaw hated that word. Ghosts did not exist. Men with rifles existed. Men with training and tactics and the will to kill existed. And somewhere in this urban wasteland, 17 of them were systematically executing his Marines. They had come in with 42 men, 3 platoons of America's finest, equipped with the most advanced technology the military had to offer. Predator drones circled overhead, their cameras scanning every rooftop, every window, every shadow. Thermal imaging equipment that could detect a lit cigarette from 300 yards. Communication gear that linked them to satellite surveillance in real time. None of it mattered. The enemy moved like smoke. They fired from impossible angles, disappeared before return fire could be coordinated, and reappeared somewhere else entirely to kill again. In the 3 hours since Shaw's unit had entered the Packard district, they had lost 6 men. 6 families that would receive that knock on the door. 6 folded flags. 6 names that Shaw would carry for the rest of his life. Fall back, he ordered. Everybody into Building 7, now! The Marines moved in pairs, covering each other, sprinting across open ground that had become a killing field. Another shot rang out. Lance Corporal Peters stumbled, but kept running, a red stain spreading across his left arm. Lucky. If you could call getting shot lucky. Shaw ran with them, his boots pounding against cracked asphalt and broken glass. Building 7 was a commercial complex that had once housed offices and small manufacturing operations. Half its roof was gone, collapsed inward during some long-ago winter. Its walls were pockmarked with bullet holes from previous engagements that nobody talked about anymore. It was not a fortress. It was barely a shelter, but it was the only cover they had. They poured through the entrance, Marines taking up defensive positions by shattered windows and crumbling doorways. Shaw counted heads, 31. They had started with 42. In 3 hours, they had lost 11 men, nearly a quarter of his force. And they still had not seen a single enemy combatant. Gunnery Sergeant Webb materialized at Shaw's elbow. The man was 45 years old, had served 20 years in the Corps, had seen combat in Iraq, Afghanistan, and half a dozen other places that never made the news. Shaw had never seen him look scared before. He looked scared now. "Sir, I've never seen anything like this," Webb said quietly, his voice pitched low so the younger Marines would not hear. "They're not just good. They're operating on a different level, the way they coordinate, the way they move, the angles they're shooting from. It's like they know our playbook." "Mercenaries?" "Has to be, but training by who?" Webb shook his head. "This isn't ISIS tactics. This isn't cartel. This is something else." Shaw moved to a window and looked out at the killing ground they had just crossed. Martinez's body lay where it had fallen. Nobody had been able to retrieve it. Nobody would be able to until this was over, however this ended. The mission had seemed straightforward when they briefed it 48 hours ago at Camp Lejeune. A domestic terrorist cell had seized control of several blocks of the Packard district, taking 47 hostages, including Senator David Morrison, who had been touring an urban renewal project when the attack began. The senator had been championing a plan to rebuild Detroit's industrial district, to bring jobs and hope back to a city that had seen too much decline. He had brought camera crews and reporters to document his vision for the future. Now those camera crews were hostages. Those reporters were prisoners. And the senator's vision for the future had become a nightmare that no one could have predicted. FBI hostage rescue had attempted an entry and been slaughtered. 12 agents dead in under 10 minutes. The footage had been leaked online within hours, grainy cell phone video showing America's elite law enforcement walking into a kill zone and dying before they could even return fire. The country had watched in horror. The president had authorized military intervention within the hour. Shaw's unit had been the closest available. They had loaded onto helicopters at dawn, landed on the outskirts of the district at noon, and begun their approach with the confidence of men who had trained for exactly this scenario. Now Shaw understood why the FBI had failed. This was not a hostage situation. This was an ambush designed by someone who understood American tactical doctrine at the deepest level. And his men were the targets of a plan that had been set in motion long before they arrived. "Lieutenant Commander?" One of the younger Marines, Lance Corporal Danny Reeves, approached with a radio in his hand. "Command wants an update." Shaw took the radio and pressed the transmit button. "Overlord, this is Eagle 6. We are pinned down in grid reference 774. Enemy strength estimated at 15 to 20 shooters with sniper capability. We have 11 KIA, multiple wounded, requesting immediate air support." The response came after a long pause. "Eagle 6, air support is negative. Weather system moving in from the northwest. All aircraft grounded until further notice. Hold your position and await reinforcement." "Overlord, we cannot hold this position. We are being systematically eliminated. We need extraction." Another pause. "Eagle 6, extraction is not available at this time. Hold your position. Reinforcements en route, ETA 4 hours. 4 hours. They would all be dead in 4 hours. Shaw handed the radio back to Reeves and saw the fear in the young man's eyes. Reeves was 19 years old, fresh out of boot camp at Parris Island on his first deployment. He had signed up to serve his country after his grandfather, Master Sergeant William Reeves, a Korean War veteran who had survived the frozen hell of Chosin Reservoir and 2 tours in that brutal peninsula, had died of lung cancer the previous year. The old man had been a Marine for 26 years. He had shown his grandson the medals in the wooden box, had told him stories about the frozen Chosin, about the retreat that became a legend, about Marines who fought their way through 7 Chinese divisions in temperatures that dropped to 40 below zero. He had spoken of honor and duty and sacrifice with a conviction that came from having lived those values under fire. When the cancer finally took him, Danny Reeves had stood at his grave and made a promise. He would carry on the family tradition. He would become the kind of man his grandfather had been. Now Reeves was going to die in an abandoned factory in Detroit, killed by enemies he would never see, And his grandfather's memory would become another name on another wall somewhere, another promise broken, another legacy lost. "Sir?" Reeves asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do we do?" Shaw did not have an answer. The afternoon light was fading, gray clouds thickening overhead, and with the darkness would come even greater danger. At least in daylight, they had some chance of spotting movement, some hope of returning fire. In the dark, they would be completely blind. The enemy would move freely. The killing would continue until there was no one left to kill. Shaw gathered his surviving Marines in the center of the building, away from the windows where sniper fire could reach. They huddled in the shadows like soldiers from some ancient war, their modern equipment useless, their training inadequate, their options exhausted. "Listen up," Shaw said, trying to inject confidence into his voice that he did not feel. "We are going to hold this position until reinforcements arrive. I want rotating watch on all approaches. 2-hour shifts. Everyone else, rest while you can. Conserve ammunition. No one fires unless you have a clear target. We cannot afford to waste rounds." The Marines nodded, but Shaw could see the doubt in their eyes. They knew the math as well as he did. 17 snipers versus 31 Marines sounded like acceptable odds until you realized that the snipers controlled every sight line, every angle, every approach. In urban warfare, the defender with elevation always won. Always. A sound from the back of the building made everyone reach for their weapons. Sergeant Webb was already moving, his rifle up, his steps silent on the dusty concrete floor. Shaw followed, hand signaling for 2 other Marines to flank left. They found the source of the sound in what had once been a manager's office. The door was half off its hinges, the interior dim with the fading afternoon light, and inside, kneeling over a wounded civilian, was a woman. She looked up as they entered, and Shaw's first impression was of eyes. Gray eyes, the color of winter sky over Lake Michigan, flat and calm and utterly without fear. Her face was weathered, lined by sun and time and something deeper than either, but not old. 50, perhaps 52. Her hair was silver gray, cut short in a practical style that suggested military experience, or perhaps medical profession, or someone who simply had no patience for vanity. She wore civilian clothes, jeans, and a dark jacket that might have been military surplus. Nothing remarkable, nothing that identified her as anything other than another victim trapped in the wrong place at the wrong time. But her hands. Shaw watched her hands as she worked on the wounded man, tying off a tourniquet with practiced efficiency, applying pressure to a wound with exactly the right amount of force. Those hands moved with memory. They knew things that required no thought, performed actions that had been practiced so many times they had become instinct rather than skill. Those were not civilian hands. Those were hands that had done this 1,000 times before, that had kept men alive in places where death was the expected outcome. And her posture. Even kneeling over a wounded man, she maintained awareness of the room around her, her head tilted slightly towards sounds that Shaw could barely hear. Her body positioned itself to minimize exposure to the doorway. These were habits that could not be faked, behaviors that came only from years of operating in hostile environments. "Ma'am, I need you to identify yourself," Shaw said, his rifle lowered but ready. She did not look up. "He'll live if you get him out of here in the next hour. Bullet passed through clean. No major arteries. But he's lost blood." An American accent. Midwest, maybe. Calm, like she was discussing a minor inconvenience rather than a gunshot wound in a combat zone. "I asked you a question." "I heard you." Now she looked up, and those gray eyes met his with an intensity that made Shaw want to take a step back. "I'm helping. That's who I am. Someone who helps." Webb moved closer, his rifle still trained on her. "What unit are you with?" "No unit." "Contractor?" "No." "Then what the hell are you doing here?" She finished securing the bandage and rose to her feet, wiping blood on her jeans. She was tall, nearly 6 feet, and she moved with a fluidity that Shaw had only seen in operators with decades of experience. Every motion was economical, purposeful, controlled. "Right now? Trying to keep people alive?" She looked past Shaw at the Marines clustered in the main room. Her eyes moved across them with an assessment that felt almost clinical. Counting, evaluating, judging. "That's not your concern," Shaw said. "It is if I'm stuck here too." She walked past him to the doorway and looked out at the shattered cityscape. Her posture changed, became even more still, like a hunting cat that had spotted prey. Shaw watched her scan the buildings, the windows, the rooftops, and something cold settled in his stomach. This woman was not afraid. I'd. Everyone in this building was afraid, from the youngest private to Shaw himself. Fear was rational in this situation. Fear was appropriate. But this woman looked at the killing ground outside with the calm assessment of someone who had seen worse. Much worse. Ma'am, we need some kind of identification, Webb tried again. A name at least. She was quiet for a long moment, still watching the buildings. When she spoke, her voice was soft. Kate. Kate Harlow. Kate Harlow what? Military? Government? Why are you here? I came looking for someone. She turned from the window and looked at Shaw. I didn't expect to find a war. Before Shaw could respond, another shot cracked outside. One of the Marines cried out, clutching his leg, and the building erupted into controlled chaos as men scrambled for cover. Through the confusion, Shaw saw Kate Harlow move. She did not duck. She did not flinch. She tilted her head slightly, like a dog hearing a distant sound, and her eyes tracked something invisible across the cityscape. 17 shooters, she said quietly. 3 teams of 5 with 2 floaters. They're using a triangulated firing pattern. 3 positions create overlapping fields of fire with no safe movement corridors. Shaw stared at her. How do you know that? The shooting pattern, the intervals between shots, the angles of entry. She pointed toward a distant building without looking at it. That one came from the northeast, 9th floor, second window from the left. The shooter repositioned approximately 8 seconds after firing. Standard protocol for urban sniper operations. Standard protocol for who? Kate Harlow finally turned to face him fully. In the dim light of the building, her gray eyes seemed to glow with something that might have been memory, might have been pain, might have been both. For people who learned from the best, she said. People who learned from me. The silence that followed was broken only by the groans of the wounded and the distant sound of wind moving through the dead buildings. Shaw felt Webb stiffen beside him, felt the sudden tension that rippled through the Marines who had heard her words. Explain, Shaw said. Now. Kate moved back to the window, staying to the side where she could not be targeted. Her eyes continued to scan the buildings as she spoke, and Shaw noticed that even while recounting her history, she never stopped assessing, never stopped calculating, never stopped being the weapon she had been trained to become. 30 years ago, I joined the Marine Corps. I was 17 years old, needed my mother's signature on the enlistment papers. She cried when she signed, said I was throwing my life away. I told her I was finding my life. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. We were both right, in our own ways. She paused, tracking something outside that Shaw could not see. 28 years ago, I became a scout sniper. Top of my class at every school they sent me to. They said I had a gift. I called it a curse that happened to be useful. 20 years ago, I was recruited for a program that doesn't officially exist. A program so classified that even mentioning its name can get you disappeared. I spent 15 years training the most advanced urban warfare specialists in the world. I wrote doctrine. I developed tactics. I created the very strategies that are being used against you right now. That's impossible. Those tactics would be classified, buried. They were classified. They were buried so deep that officially they never existed. The program was called Phantom Edge. 12 operators from the best special operations units in the world brought together to develop the next generation of urban warfare doctrine. We were going to change everything. We were going to make American forces unbeatable in city fights. Kate's voice hardened. But someone dug them up. Someone learned them. And now someone is using them to turn this city into a slaughterhouse. Webb stepped forward. Ma'am, with respect, that's a hell of a claim. You expect us to believe you're some kind of legendary sniper who just happened to be in Detroit when this all went down? Kate did not answer. Her attention had fixed on something outside, something Shaw could not see. Her entire body had gone still, that predatory stillness he had noticed before. Corporal Hayes, she said without turning, the Marine who went down outside. He was carrying an M40A6, standard issue sniper rifle. How do you know that? Because I trained on the M40 series for a decade. I can recognize one by silhouette alone. She paused. If someone retrieves that rifle, I can end this. Hayes is 100 feet away, open ground. Anyone who tries to reach him dies. Maybe. Kate finally turned to face him, and Shaw saw something new in those gray eyes. Not fear, never fear, but something that looked almost like hope. Or maybe I know something about crossing open ground that your men don't. Shaw laughed. A harsh, bitter sound. Lady, I don't know who you are or what game you're playing, but nobody crosses that ground alive. Nobody. I can. You'll die. I've died before. She held his gaze. Figuratively speaking, the real death is watching people die when you could have saved them. I've done enough of that to last several lifetimes. Behind them, another shot rang out. One of the Marines screamed. The sound was followed by frantic calls for the medic, by the shuffle of men trying to help while staying in cover, by the growing desperation that filled the building like poison gas. Shaw looked at his men, at the wounded growing in number with each passing hour, at the able-bodied, their faces drawn with fear and exhaustion, at the bodies they could not retrieve, lying in the fading light outside like accusations. 4 hours until reinforcement. At this rate, there would be no one left to reinforce. He turned back to Kate Harlow. If you're lying about who you are, if this is some kind of trick, I will personally put a bullet in your head. If I'm lying, you won't have to. The snipers will do it for you. She moved toward the window. I need 60 seconds of suppressing fire. Not aimed, just enough to make them keep their heads down. When I move, don't try to follow me. Don't try to cover me. Just keep shooting and pray I'm as good as I used to be. Used to be? Kate paused at the window. For a moment, her mask slipped, and Shaw glimpsed something beneath it. Not fear, something worse. Something that looked like the memory of fear, the ghost of a terror so profound that it had hollowed her out and left only this calm, deadly shell. I haven't fired a weapon in 8 years, she said quietly. I walked away from all of this after. She stopped, shook her head. It doesn't matter. What matters is that your men are dying, and I'm the only person in this building who knows how to stop it. She looked at him one final time. Give the order, Lieutenant Commander, or don't. But decide now. We're running out of time. Shaw thought of Martinez, dead in the street, of the 11 others who had fallen, of the letters he would have to write, the families he would have to face. He thought of the 17 invisible killers surrounding this building, patient as spiders, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. And he thought of his father, Gunnery Sergeant Michael Shaw, retired after 30 years in the Corps, who had served 2 tours in Desert Storm and Operation Iraqi Freedom, and come home with shrapnel in his leg and nightmares that never fully went away. His father had told him stories about impossible battles, about the highway of death and the Battle of Fallujah and the brutal street fighting in Ramadi. He had spoken of men and women who had turned the tide through sheer force of will, through courage that defied explanation, through sacrifice that bordered on the impossible. His father had believed in legends. His father had said that sometimes in the darkest moments, when all hope seemed lost and death seemed certain, heroes appeared. Not superheroes from comic books, but ordinary people who found something extraordinary inside themselves. People who refused to accept defeat. People who changed the math when the math said everyone was going to die. Shaw looked at Kate Harlow and wondered if he was looking at one of those people. All units, Shaw said into his radio, making the decision that would either save his men or doom them all. Suppressing fire on my mark, northwest quadrant, sustained burst, 60 seconds. Around the building, Marines shifted into position, rifles came up, fingers found triggers. Kate Harlow crouched by the window like a runner waiting for the starting gun. Her breathing had slowed, become deep and controlled. Her eyes had gone distant, focused on something internal, some calculation that Shaw could not imagine. Mark, Shaw said. The building erupted in thunder. 30 rifles firing simultaneously, pouring lead into the buildings to the northwest, shattering windows and chewing concrete and filling the air with the roar of American firepower. Kate moved. Shaw had seen fast. He had trained with some of the best operators in the world. He knew what human speed looked like when it was honed to its absolute peak. This was something else. Kate Harlow did not run across that open ground. She flowed. Her body seemed to know where the bullets would go before they were fired, shifting and weaving through a pattern of death that should have been impossible to predict. She covered 50 feet in seconds that felt like hours, her form low and economical, never moving in a straight line, never presenting the same angle twice. A shot cracked past her, missed by inches. She did not flinch. Another shot. This one kicked up concrete at her feet. She was already somewhere else. She reached Hayes's body, grabbed the rifle and the ammunition in one smooth motion, and turned back. The return journey was even faster, a blur of movement that seemed to defy the laws of physics. 3 more shots chased her. none connected. She came through a different window than the one she had left, rolled across the floor, and came up with the rifle in her hands. Her breathing was slightly elevated. That was the only sign that she had just done something impossible. "Cease fire," she said calmly. The guns fell silent. 30 Marines stared at her with expressions ranging from disbelief to awe. Webb found his voice first. "Holy Mother of God, who are you?" Kate was already checking the rifle, her hands moving with the automatic precision of decades of practice. She cleared the chamber, inspected the bore, adjusted the scope. Her fingers found imperfections that no one else would have noticed, made corrections that took seconds, but mattered in ways that only another sniper would understand. "I told you my name," she said without looking up. "Kate Harlow, Master Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, retired. Scout sniper for 15 years. Instructor at Quantico for 3. And after that," she paused and something dark moved behind her eyes. "After that, I was something else entirely." The Specter. Everyone turned to look at Webb. The gunnery sergeant's face had gone pale, his eyes wide with recognition. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "You're the Specter. I thought you were a myth." "Most legends are." Kate finished her inspection and brought the rifle up. Her eye found the scope, and suddenly her entire body changed. The casual alertness disappeared, replaced by something absolute. Something focused with an intensity that seemed to bend the air around her. "What is she talking about?" Shaw demanded. Webb did not take his eyes off Kate. "When I was a boot, there were stories. A woman sniper who could shoot better than anyone alive. Who could hit targets that nobody else could even see. They said she had 127 confirmed kills, 3 Silver Stars, a Navy Cross. They said she was the deadliest marksman the Corps had ever produced." "That sounds like recruitment propaganda." "That's what I thought." Webb swallowed hard. "Until now." Kate's finger caressed the trigger. "Northwest corner, 9th floor, second window from the left. He moved 30 seconds ago. Bad discipline. He'll move again in approximately 45 seconds. That's his pattern." Shaw grabbed his binoculars and focused on the building. He saw nothing. Empty windows, shadows. The ordinary desolation of urban decay. 40 seconds passed, 45, 50. "There's nothing that..." The shot cut him off. The rifle kicked against Kate's shoulder, and 800 yards away, something dark jerked behind a distant window. A body fell, tumbling out of the window frame and dropping 9 stories to the street below. Shaw lowered his binoculars and stared at Kate Harlow. "How?" he whispered. Kate worked the bolt, ejecting the spent casing. She did not look away from the scope. Her voice was flat, emotionless, as if she were discussing the weather rather than the death she had just delivered. "Because I know how they think. I know their timing, their rotations, their tells." She paused, and when she spoke again, there was something terrible in her voice. Something that sounded like grief. "I know because I trained the same way. I know because I wrote the doctrine they're using. I know because 8 years ago, this exact scenario killed 11 of my friends." She shifted her position slightly, tracking something invisible across the cityscape. "And I know because I'm going to spend the rest of today doing what I should have done back then. I'm going to find every single one of them, and I'm going to put them on." Another shot, another body. Shaw watched a second figure fall from a building to the east, watched it tumble through the dying light and hit the ground with a distant, terrible sound. 16 left, Kate said quietly. 15 to go. And something in her voice made Shaw believe, for the first time since this nightmare began, that they might actually survive the night. The next 2 hours changed everything Shaw thought he knew about warfare. He had been trained by experts at Quantico and Camp Pendleton. He had studied tactics developed over centuries of combat, from Sun Tzu to Clausewitz to the modern doctrine that emerged from the hard lessons of Fallujah and Ramadi. He had learned from the best military minds America had to offer, had absorbed their wisdom, and made it his own. All of that education became worthless as he watched Kate Harlow work. She did not just shoot, she orchestrated. Every kill was preceded by minutes of absolute stillness, during which she seemed to be listening to something no one else could hear. Her breathing slowed to almost nothing. Her heartbeat, visible in the subtle pulse at her temple, dropped to a rhythm that seemed barely compatible with life. She became one with the rifle, the scope, the distant target, the wind that moved between the buildings like an invisible river. She tracked sound through the maze of buildings, calculated angles through some internal mathematics, that defied explanation and predicted movements before they happened. Shaw watched her lips move sometimes, silent calculations, adjustments for windage and elevation, and the Coriolis effect that only mattered at extreme range, but that she accounted for anyway because that was who she was. 5 targets fell in the first hour. Each shot was perfect. Each kill was clean. But more than that, each shot was impossible. She hit snipers who were completely concealed, who had not moved in minutes, who by all rights should have been invisible to anyone outside their own buildings. "How is she doing this?" Reeves whispered to Shaw during a brief lull. The young Marine had been watching Kate with an expression that hovered somewhere between terror and worship. "It's like she can see through walls." Shaw had no answer. He had stopped trying to understand and simply started believing. Kate shifted positions constantly, never staying in one place long enough for the enemy to triangulate her location. She used the building's architecture like a weapon, finding sight lines that should not have existed, creating angles that defied the geometry of the urban landscape. Every movement was deliberate. Every breath was controlled. She had become something more than human, a machine designed for a single purpose, executing that purpose with mechanical precision. But Shaw noticed things the others did not. The way Kate's hands trembled slightly between shots, then steadied completely when she touched the rifle. The way she closed her eyes after each kill, just for a moment, as if she were saying a prayer or offering an apology. The way her breathing changed when she talked about the doctrine she had written, about the program that did not officially exist. This was not a woman who enjoyed killing. This was a woman who had walked away from killing 8 years ago and was now being forced to confront everything she had tried to leave behind. Every shot she fired was a piece of her past coming back to haunt her. Every target she eliminated was a reminder of the skills she had tried to forget. And somehow, that made her more frightening. A killer who loved death was predictable. A killer who hated death, who understood its weight and carried its burden, was something else entirely. That kind of killer was not performing a task. She was making a sacrifice. By the time darkness began to fall, the enemy's numbers had been cut in half. 8 snipers down, 9 remaining. But Kate had stopped shooting. She sat by the window, her eyes still pressed to the scope, her body still intense with concentration. "What's wrong?" Shaw asked. "They've changed pattern." Her voice was troubled. "They're not using standard doctrine anymore. They're improvising." "Isn't that good? Improvisation means mistakes, not this kind of improvisation." Kate lowered the rifle and turned to face him. In the dying light, her gray eyes looked almost silver. "This is adaptive response. They've recognized my shooting pattern and they're countering it. They're learning." "Can't you adapt too?" "I can, but this level of tactical adjustment in real time." She shook her head. "I've only seen it once before from people who trained under me, people who knew my techniques well enough to counter them." The implication hung in the air like smoke. "You think someone from your past is leading them?" Shaw asked. Kate was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "There's a pattern emerging, not just in the shooting but in the overall strategy. The way they isolated your unit. The way they're bleeding you slowly instead of overwhelming you. The psychological warfare letting you see you're dead but not retrieve them. This isn't mercenary work. This is personal." "Personal how?" Kate stood and walked away from the window. For the first time since Shaw had met her, she looked her age. The lines on her face seemed deeper, the gray in her hair more pronounced. She looked like a woman who had seen too much and was being forced to see it all again. 8 years ago, I led a team called Phantom Edge, 12 of the best snipers in the world. We were developing new urban warfare tactics for the most dangerous environments on Earth. We were going to change how America fought in cities. She stopped by a support pillar and leaned against it, her eyes distant. Our first real mission was in Syria, an extraction in a city that had become a killing ground. We had the best training, the best equipment, the best people. We walked in confident, invincible. Her voice broke slightly. We walked into a trap. They knew we were coming. They knew our tactics, our communication protocols, our movement patterns. Everything we had developed, they had somehow learned, and they used it against us. Shaw felt the temperature in the room drop. "What happened?" 11 people died. 11 of the finest soldiers I've ever known. I watched them die over 3 days, listening to them on the radio, hearing them fight and fall and go silent. One by one, Kate's hands had begun to tremble again. I was supposed to die with them. But I ran. I survived because I was a coward. You survived because you were smart. I survived because I was afraid. She looked at him and Shaw saw the guilt that had been eating at her for 8 years. I've spent every day since then trying to forget what I was, trying to become someone who couldn't do what I did, someone who couldn't kill with such terrible efficiency. She gestured toward the window, toward the bodies she had created. And now I'm back, doing the same thing, killing the same way, because somehow the tactics I created are being used again. And that means someone learned from Phantom Edge, someone who might have been there. Shaw processed this information carefully. You think one of the people who killed your team is leading this operation? I think it's possible. I think it's worse than possible. Kate closed her eyes. There's only one person alive who knew Ghost Protocol well enough to adapt to my shooting pattern in real time. One person besides me who understood the doctrine at that level. Who? Kate opened her eyes. They were wet, but her voice was steady. His name was Victor Cross. He was my second in command, my best friend, and he was supposed to have died in Syria with the others. The name hung in the air like a curse. But you're not sure he died? Shaw asked. I was never sure of anything after Syria. The mission was classified beyond classified. Bodies were never recovered. Reports were sealed. Everyone who knew anything was either dead or ordered never to speak of it again. Kate's jaw tightened. I've spent 8 years believing I was the only survivor. 8 years carrying 11 deaths on my conscience. But now, she looked toward the window, toward the darkness that was consuming the city. Now I'm starting to wonder if I was wrong about everything. Before Shaw could respond, a sound cut through the building. A sound that should not have been possible. A voice broadcasting on the Marine tactical frequency, speaking words that changed everything. Hello, Kate. I was wondering when you'd figure it out. Kate went rigid, her face drained of color. Shaw watched her hand go to the rifle, watched her fingers wrap around the stock like a drowning person grabbing a lifeline. The voice continued, calm and conversational, as if it were discussing the weather rather than death and betrayal and 8 years of lies. It's been a long time. I've missed you. I've been waiting for you to come back to the world, waiting for you to remember what you really are. Kate raised the radio to her mouth. Her voice was steady, but Shaw could see her hand shaking. Victor, there she is, the Specter herself, the legend, the ghost who couldn't stay dead. A soft laugh came through the radio. Welcome home, Kate. We have so much to talk about. The transmission ended, leaving silence in its wake. 30 Marines stared at Kate Harlow, watching as the woman who had saved their lives confronted something from her past that was worse than any sniper bullet. Shaw saw her face transform. The guilt was still there, the pain, the weight of 11 deaths in 8 years of running. But beneath it all, something new was emerging. Something cold, something dangerous. Something that looked like the beginning of a war. Kate lowered the radio and looked at Shaw. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, controlled, and absolutely terrifying. The enemy has a name now, she said, and I'm going to find him, whatever it takes, whatever it costs. She picked up the rifle and moved toward the window. This isn't about saving your Marines anymore, Lieutenant Commander. This is about ending something that should have ended 8 years ago. She brought the scope to her eye and began to scan the darkness. Tell your men to rest while they can. Tomorrow we go hunting. And somewhere in the ruins of Detroit, Victor Cross was waiting, patient as death itself, for the final chapter of a story that had begun in blood and betrayal 8 years before. The legend had returned. The ghost was awake. And before sunrise, one of them would finally rest forever. The radio fell silent, but Victor's voice continued to echo in Kate Harlow's mind like a ghost that refused to be exorcised. 8 years. 8 years of nightmares and guilt and running from a past that had finally caught up with her. 8 years of believing she was the only one who had survived that hell in Syria, the only one who carried the weight of 11 deaths, the only one who remembered the screams that came through the radio as her team died one by one. She could still hear those voices. Even now, standing in this abandoned factory in Detroit, surrounded by Marines who looked to her for salvation, she could hear them. Thomas Rivera calling out coordinates before his transmission cut off mid-word. Sarah Chen reporting enemy positions until a burst of static marked her ending. Michael Kowalski, the big Polish kid from Chicago, who always made everyone laugh, screaming for help that never came. 11 voices, 11 friends, 11 ghosts that had followed her through 8 years of exile, whispering in the quiet moments, asking questions she could not answer. Why did you live? Why did you run? Why are we dead when you still breathe? And now Victor Cross was alive. Not just alive, but here, leading the very killers who had pinned down these Marines in this urban graveyard. Using the tactics they had developed together, the doctrine they had written in blood and sweat and countless hours of training. The man she had mourned, the friends she had believed lost, the ghosts she had added to her collection of regrets. Everything she thought she knew was crumbling, like the buildings around her. Kate's hands had stopped trembling. That was the strange thing about confronting your worst fear. Once it materialized, once it stood before you in flesh and blood rather than shadow and memory, the fear transformed into something else entirely. Something colder, something harder, something that felt very much like the beginning of understanding. Ma'am? Lance Corporal Danny Reeves was watching her with wide eyes, the radio still clutched in his young hands. Who was that? Who is Victor? Kate did not answer immediately. She was processing, calculating, adjusting her understanding of the situation to accommodate this new and terrible information. Victor Cross was alive. Victor Cross was here. Everything she thought she knew about Phantom Edge, about Syria, about the worst 3 days of her life, had just been thrown into question. Someone I used to trust, she finally said. Her voice was flat, controlled, betraying nothing of the storm raging behind her gray eyes. Someone who was supposed to be dead. Lieutenant Commander Shaw stepped forward, his face tight with concern. If you know this man, if he's connected to your past, I need to understand what we're dealing with. My men's lives depend on it. Kate turned to face him, and Shaw saw something new in her expression. The guilt was still there, buried deep, but it had been joined by something else. Determination. Resolve. The look of a soldier who had finally found a mission worth dying for. Victor Cross was my executive officer in Phantom Edge, my second in command. We trained together for 3 years before Syria. We developed tactics together, wrote doctrine together, bled together in a dozen training exercises that nearly killed us. He was the closest thing I had to a brother. Her voice carried the weight of memories that still had edges sharp enough to cut. She remembered the first time she met Victor at a classified briefing facility in Virginia. Both of them selected for a program they knew nothing about. He had been a major in the Army, Delta Force, with a reputation for tactical brilliance that preceded him wherever he went. She had been skeptical at first. Army and Marines did not always mix well. Different cultures, different approaches, different egos. But Victor had won her over within the first week, not through charm or politics, but through competence. The man understood urban warfare at a level that Kate had never encountered before. He saw patterns in chaos, found order in confusion, created solutions to problems that other operators did not even recognize as problems. Working with him had made her better, sharper, more capable than she had ever been alone. And when Syria happened, when everything fell apart, she had believed he died trying to save the team. She had carried that belief like a wound that would not heal, adding it to the guilt that had slowly consumed her over the years. Now she knew different. Now she knew nothing at all. She moved to the window and looked out at the darkness that had swallowed the city. Somewhere out there, Victor was waiting, watching, planning his next move. The brother she had mourned was now the enemy she had to defeat, and Kate did not know which reality hurt more. He was also the best tactical mind I ever worked with. If he's running this operation, we're not facing mercenaries or terrorists. We're facing someone who knows exactly how I think, how I move, how I fight. Someone who can predict my every decision because he helped me develop the decision-making process in the first place. Webb spoke up from his position near the door. Then how do we beat him? Kate was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know if we can. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Around the room, Marines exchanged glances, heavy with fear and uncertainty. They had watched Kate Harlow perform miracles over the past few hours, had seen her eliminate 8 enemy snipers with a precision that bordered on supernatural. If even she doubted their chances, what hope did the rest of them have? But Kate was not finished. She turned from the window and walked to where Reeves stood, still clutching the radio. She placed her hand on the young Marine's shoulder and looked into his eyes with an intensity that made him want to look away, but somehow made it impossible to do so. I said, I don't know if we can beat him, she repeated. But that doesn't mean we stop fighting. That doesn't mean we give up. It means we adapt. We improvise. We become something he doesn't expect. She released Reeves and addressed the room. Victor knows my patterns. He knows my tactics. He spent the last 8 years studying everything I ever taught, everything I ever wrote, everything I ever did. He thinks he knows exactly what I'm going to do. A cold smile crossed her face, the first real emotion she had shown since Victor's voice had come through the radio. He's wrong. Kate set up her position on the third floor of the building, in what had once been a conference room with large windows overlooking the killing ground to the east. The windows were shattered now, victim to some long-ago violence, and the October wind blew through the opening with a cold bite that reminded everyone that winter was coming. Frost would be here within weeks, snow within a month. This building, already cold and hostile, would become a frozen tomb for anyone still trapped inside. But Kate did not think about the future. She focused on the present, on the immediate task, on the enemies who still drew breath in the darkness outside. She had commandeered a table, overturned it, and propped it against the wall to create a stable shooting platform. Her rifle rested on the table's edge, scope aligned with a distant building where she had identified movement 20 minutes earlier. The weapon felt familiar in her hands, like an old friend she had not seen in years but had never truly forgotten. Muscle memory guided her adjustments, small movements that compensated for temperature and humidity and the subtle vibrations of the building around her. But she was not shooting. Not yet. Instead, she was teaching. Danny Reeves knelt beside her, binoculars pressed to his eyes, scanning the building she had indicated. The young Marine was terrified. Kate could see that clearly. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the focus, and his breathing was too fast, too shallow, the respiration of someone whose body was preparing for fight or flight. But beneath the fear was something else. Hunger, a desperate desire to learn, to become something more than he was, to honor the grandfather whose memory had brought him to this moment. Kate recognized that hunger. She had felt it herself decades ago, when she had been a young recruit with more ambition than skill. Someone had taken the time to teach her, to transform her raw potential into deadly capability. Now it was her turn to pass that gift along. "What do you see?" Kate asked, her voice low and patient. "Buildings? Windows? Shadows?" Reeves lowered the binoculars in frustration. "I don't know what I'm looking for." "You're looking with your eyes. Stop." "How else am I supposed to look?" Kate adjusted her position slightly, her eyes still pressed to the scope. "Your eyes are tools, Danny, good tools but limited. They can only see what's directly in front of them. They can be fooled by shadows and distance and the tricks that light plays in an urban environment." She paused, tracking something in the distance. "But your other senses are not so easily deceived. Close your eyes." Reeves hesitated, then obeyed. He felt vulnerable, exposed, like a child hiding from the dark. "Now listen, not to the obvious sounds, not to the wind, or the distant traffic, or the voices of your fellow Marines. Listen deeper. Listen to the city itself." Reeves concentrated, straining to hear something beyond the immediate. At first, there was nothing, just the cold wind and his own breathing and the rapid drumbeat of his frightened heart. Then slowly he began to hear it. A pattern in the chaos, the way sound moved through the buildings, bouncing off concrete and glass and metal, creating echoes that told stories if you knew how to read them. A scraping sound from the northeast that could have been debris, but was too rhythmic, too regular. A subtle whisper of fabric against stone from somewhere to the south. "I hear something," he said, his eyes still closed. "Northeast, something moving, and south too, like someone's shifting position." "Good." Kate's voice held a note of approval. "Now open your eyes and look at the dust." Reeves obeyed, confused. "The dust?" "On the windowsills, on the exposed floors of those buildings across the street. Watch how it moves." He watched. At first, he saw nothing but the normal drift of particles in the air, the ordinary dance of debris that filled any abandoned space. But then he began to notice patterns, the way dust rose from certain areas and not others, the slight disturbances that indicated recent movement, the telltale signs that someone had passed through a space within the last few minutes. "The sniper in the northeast building," Kate said quietly, "moved to a new position approximately 90 seconds ago. He's 3 floors up from where he was, probably responding to a signal from his team leader. He thinks the elevation change will give him a better angle on our position." "How can you possibly know that?" "Because I know how they think. I taught them to think that way." Kate's finger caressed the trigger. "And now I'm going to use that knowledge to kill them." The shot split the night like a thunderclap. 800 yards away, in a window that Reeves could barely see even with binoculars, a figure jerked and fell backward into the darkness of the building. 9 down, Kate said, working the bolt to chamber another round. 8 to go. Reeves stared at her with something approaching awe. That was impossible. The distance, the wind, the angle. Nothing is impossible. There are only things we don't yet understand. Kate scanned the buildings again, searching for her next target. Your grandfather knew that. Every Marine who has ever done something extraordinary knew that. The impossible is just the possible waiting for someone brave enough to attempt it. The mention of his grandfather made Reeves's chest tighten. How did you know about my grandfather? I didn't, I guessed. You have the look of someone fighting for more than yourself. Someone carrying a legacy. She glanced at him briefly. Am I wrong? No, ma'am, he was Master Sergeant William Reeves. Korea, 2 tours at Chosin. Khe-san, Reeves blinked in surprise. Yes, ma'am, how did you know? Because men who survived Khe-san had a certain quality, a certain way of looking at the world. Like they had already seen the worst it could offer and had decided to keep living anyway. Kate returned her attention to the scope. Your grandfather passed that quality to you. I can see it in your eyes. Before Reeves could respond, movement in the distance caught Kate's attention. She tracked it, calculated, adjusted for the wind that had shifted slightly in the past 30 seconds. Watch, she said, not the window where you expect the target to appear. Watch the window to the left, 1 floor down. Reeves looked through his binoculars, focusing on the window Kate had indicated. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then a shadow moved, a figure stepping briefly into view before pulling back. But Kate had already fired. The shot preceded the movement, anticipating where the target would be rather than reacting to where it was. The shadow fell. 10 down, 7 remaining. Reeves lowered his binoculars slowly. You shot before he even appeared. How is that possible? Pattern recognition, prediction, understanding how your enemy thinks well enough to know what they're going to do before they do it. Kate ejected the spent casing and chambered another round. It's not magic, Danny. It's just experience. 30 years of watching people move, learning their habits, understanding the rhythms of combat. Every soldier has a pattern, even the best ones. Even me. She paused and something dark moved behind her eyes. Especially me. Gunnery Sergeant Webb found the documents while Kate was hunting. He had not meant to search her belongings, but the bag she had brought sat in the corner of the manager's office where she had first been found, and Webb was a curious man by nature. Curious and suspicious and alive largely because of those qualities. The bag was military surplus, olive drab, worn at the edges by years of use. Inside were the expected items: medical supplies, water purification tablets, protein bars, a compact first aid kit, standard survival gear for someone traveling through dangerous territory. But at the bottom, wrapped in a plastic bag to protect against moisture, was a folder. Webb knew he should not open it, knew that whatever secrets Kate Harlow carried were her own business, that she had already proven herself by saving their lives. That trust should be extended to someone who had given them such a gift. He opened it anyway. The documents inside were old, some of them water-damaged, others torn at the edges. But enough remained to read, and what Webb read made his blood run cold. Operation Phantom Edge, established 2013. Classification level, beyond top secret. A joint program between the Central Intelligence Agency, the Department of Defense, and the Joint Special Operations Command. Purpose: development of next-generation urban warfare doctrine for application in the most challenging combat environments. Webb read the mission statement 3 times, letting the words sink in. This was not a standard military program. This was something else entirely. A black project designed to create the most effective urban combat specialists the world had ever seen. The kind of program that received unlimited funding and zero oversight. The kind that produced results that could never be acknowledged publicly. There were personnel files, 12 of them, each with a photograph and a biography that read like a greatest hits album of American special operations. Delta Force operators with more combat deployments than Webb had years in service. Navy SEALs who had been legends in their community before the age of 30. MARSOC raiders who had performed missions that would never be acknowledged by any government. CIA paramilitary officers whose records were more redaction than text. These were not ordinary soldiers. These were the elite of the elite, the tip of the spear. The operators who got called when everything else had failed and failure was not an option. And at the top of the roster, designated team leader, was a face Webb now knew well. Master Sergeant Catherine Marie Harlow, Scout Sniper, 1st Marine Division. 127 confirmed kills across 6 deployments. Silver Star with 2 oak leaf clusters. Navy Cross, Purple Heart, Meritorious Service Medal, Presidential Unit Citation. The list of awards went on for half a page, a catalog of heroism that most soldiers could not achieve in 10 careers. But it was the photograph that made Webb's breath catch in his throat. Kate Harlow, at 44 years old, 8 years younger than she was now, looking into the camera with eyes that held none of the weight he had seen tonight. She looked confident, eager, alive in a way that the woman currently hunting snipers from the 3rd floor no longer seemed to be. Her face was unlined by the grief that now etched her features, her posture straight with the pride of someone who had never known defeat. That woman had died in Syria. The woman who remained was her ghost, walking through a world she no longer quite belonged to. Beneath her photograph was a note in red ink, stamped with a date from 2016. Mission status, catastrophic failure. Unit status, destroyed. Survivors, 1. Webb turned to the next page and found the mission report. Most of it was redacted, black bars of ink covering names and locations and details that someone had decided should never see the light of day. But enough remained to piece together what had happened, and what Webb pieced together made his stomach turn. Syria, March 2016. The city of Al-Raqqa, held by enemy forces, had become a fortress of terror. Somewhere in that labyrinth of narrow streets and shattered buildings, a high-value target awaited elimination. The kind of target that could not be hit by drones or missiles. The kind that required operators on the ground. The kind that demanded the best America had to offer. Phantom Edge had been deployed for what should have been a routine extraction. 12 operators going in under cover of darkness, executing their mission with the precision of a surgical strike, and coming out before anyone knew they had been there. The operation had been planned for months, rehearsed in training facilities that replicated the target environment down to the smallest detail. Every contingency had been anticipated, every variable had been accounted for. Something had gone wrong, terribly catastrophically wrong. Someone had known they were coming. The enemy had been waiting, positioned in exactly the right places, armed with exactly the right information. The team had been ambushed within minutes of entering the city, pinned down in a kill zone that had been designed specifically for them. The mission report documented what followed in clinical, detached language that somehow made the horror worse. 11 casualties over 72 hours. 11 of America's finest killed one by one in a city that had become their tomb. The report listed each death with bureaucratic precision, each entry a monument to failure and loss. Gunshot wound, head. Time of death, 0347 hours, March 15th. Operator call sign Viper. Gunshot wound, chest. Time of death, 1523 hours, March 15th. Operator call sign Frost. Explosive device, multiple trauma. Time of death, 0812 hours, March 16th. Operator call sign Phoenix. Gunshot wounds, multiple. Time of death, 2234 hours, March 16th. Operator call sign Ghost. The list went on. 11 names, 11 deaths. 11 of the best soldiers America had ever produced, killed in a city that history would remember only as a footnote in a war that never seemed to end. At the bottom of the list, a single note that explained everything and nothing. Master Sergeant Harlow, extracted via emergency protocols. Sole survivor, recommended for psychological evaluation and indefinite leave. Program status, terminated. All records to be sealed pursuant to National Security Directive 47. Webb closed the folder and sat in silence for a long moment. He thought about the woman on the 3rd floor, about the calm efficiency with which she killed, about the ghost that haunted her eyes when she thought no one was looking. She had survived something that should have killed her. She had lost 11 people she called family. And now, 8 years later, she was back in another city of death, fighting enemies who used the very tactics she had developed. Webb understood something in that moment. Kate Harlow was not here by accident. She had not stumbled into this situation while passing through Detroit. She had come here deliberately, drawn by something she had recognized in the news reports about the attack. She had come here to confront her past, and whatever she found, whatever truth awaited her in the darkness of this city, Webb suspected it was going to change everything. Kate felt them adapting before she saw it. It was subtle at first, a change in the rhythm of the enemy's movements that most people would not have noticed. But Kate was not most people. She had spent decades learning to read the language of combat, to interpret the silent conversations that happened between soldiers in the heat of battle. And what she read now made her stomach tighten with unease. The remaining snipers were no longer following standard doctrine. They were not moving in the patterns she had anticipated, not positioning themselves according to the tactics she had taught. They were doing something else, something she recognized but had not seen in years. Ghost Protocol. The name surfaced in her memory like a body rising from deep water. Ghost Protocol had been developed in the final months of Phantom Edge, a set of advanced counter-sniper tactics designed specifically to defeat an enemy who knew your standard playbook. It was doctrine within doctrine, a secret language that only 3 people in the world had ever learned. Kate herself, Thomas Rivera, her spotter and closest friend, and Victor Cross, her second-in-command. Thomas was dead. She had heard him die over the radio in Syria, heard his last words as the bullet took him, heard the silence that followed, and knew that another piece of her soul had been torn away. But Victor, Kate lowered her rifle and closed her eyes, forcing herself to think clearly despite the chaos of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Victor was alive. Victor was here. And Victor was using Ghost Protocol against her, which meant he had not only survived Syria, but had continued to develop and refine the tactics they had created together. Which meant everything Kate thought she knew about what happened in that city 8 years ago was wrong. Something's changed. Lieutenant Commander Shaw had climbed to the 3rd floor, concern etched into his features. He knelt beside Kate, careful to stay below the window line, and studied her face with the intensity of a man trying to read a map in a foreign language. What do you mean? They're adapting. Kate opened her eyes but did not look at him. Her gaze remained fixed on the darkness outside, on the buildings that held enemies she could no longer predict. The remaining 7 snipers have shifted to a protocol I didn't include in standard doctrine, something we developed separately, privately, for situations exactly like this one. A protocol Victor knows? Victor helped create it, which means he's not just running this operation, he's actively participating, actively directing, making real-time adjustments based on what he's observing. Kate finally turned to face Shaw, and he saw fear in her eyes for the first time since they had met. He's watching me, Commander. He's been watching me this entire time. Everything I've done, every shot I've taken, every tactic I've employed. He's learning, adapting, getting ready for something. Ready for what? Before Kate could answer, the radio crackled to life. Victor's voice filled the room, calm and conversational, as if he were discussing the weather rather than the life and death struggle unfolding across the city. 11 kills in 3 hours, Kate. Impressive. You've still got it. But then again, I always knew you would. Natural talent doesn't fade. It just waits for the right moment to reassert itself. Kate grabbed the radio from Reeves and pressed the transmit button. Her voice was steady, controlled, revealing nothing of the turmoil beneath. Why, Victor? Why any of this? The hostages, the Marines, this entire operation. What are you trying to accomplish? A soft laugh came through the speaker. Always straight to the point. That's what I loved about you, Kate. No games, no pretense. Just direct, honest communication. Answer the question. I'm trying to accomplish what we should have accomplished 8 years ago. The truth, Kate. The complete, ugly, devastating truth about what happened to our team. Kate felt her grip tighten on the radio. Our team died in Syria. I know the truth. I lived it. You survived it. That's not the same as understanding it. Victor's voice lost some of its casual warmth, replaced by something harder. Something that sounded almost like grief. Did you ever wonder why the enemy knew we were coming? Did you ever ask yourself how they could have known our tactics so perfectly, our movements so precisely? Intel leak. Someone sold us out. Yes, someone did, but it wasn't who you think, Kate. It wasn't some faceless bureaucrat or careless analyst. It was deliberate, calculated, authorized at the highest levels of our own government. Kate felt the blood drain from her face. What are you talking about? Phantom Edge was never supposed to succeed. We were never supposed to come home from Syria. Our entire program, our entire team, was a loose end that someone very powerful wanted to eliminate. And when we walked into that city, we walked into a trap that our own people had set for us. The words hit Kate like physical blows. She gripped the windowsill to steady herself, her knuckles going white against the cold stone. This was not possible. This could not be true. Everything she believed about Syria, about her team, about the sacrifice they had made, was built on the foundation of enemy action. They had died fighting terrorists, killed by men who hated everything America stood for. But Victor was saying something different. Victor was saying they had been betrayed, murdered, sacrificed by the very government they had sworn to protect. "You're lying," Kate said, but her voice lacked conviction. "This is psychological warfare. You're trying to break me." "I'm trying to wake you up." Victor's voice carried an urgency that Kate had not heard before. "For 8 years, you've blamed yourself for surviving. For 8 years, you've carried guilt that doesn't belong to you. The only person responsible for those 11 deaths is the man who sold us out, Kate. The man who traded our lives for political convenience." "Who? Tell me who?" Silence stretched across the radio frequency. When Victor spoke again, his voice was heavy with rage, barely contained. "General Harrison Morrison. He was the director of special operations when Phantom Edge was active. He authorized our mission. He approved our deployment, and he made a deal with an arms broker who had connections to the very people we were sent to eliminate. Our location, our tactics, our entire operational plan was delivered to the enemy 48 hours before we landed. We never had a chance, Kate. We were dead the moment we boarded those helicopters." Kate felt the world tilt beneath her feet. General Harrison Morrison. She knew that name. Every operator in Special Forces knew that name. He had been a legend in the community, a 4-star general who had shaped American military policy for 2 decades. He had retired 3 years ago with full honors, lauded as a hero, celebrated as a patriot. And according to Victor, he had murdered 11 of America's finest soldiers for political convenience. "Morrison retired," Kate said, her voice hollow. "He lives in Virginia now, golf courses and charity dinners and book deals." "Wrong. He lives through his legacy now, through his son-in-law." Victor's voice took on a sharp edge. "Senator David Morrison, Kate, the man currently being held hostage in this building. The general's daughter married him 15 years ago. Everything the senator has, his career, his influence, his power came from his connection to the general. The senator knows where the bodies are buried, literally. The pieces fell into place with terrible clarity. The hostage situation, the location, the timing, none of it was random. Victor had not chosen Detroit because of strategic value. He had chosen it because the senator was here, because the senator was the thread that could unravel everything. "You're not a terrorist," Kate said slowly. "You're an executioner. You're using the hostages to get to the senator, to get to Morrison. I'm a soldier seeking justice for fallen comrades. The same thing you should have been doing for the last 8 years instead of hiding in Montana, pretending you could escape what you are." The radio fell silent. Kate stared at it, her mind racing through implications she did not want to consider. Around her, the Marines who had heard the transmission stood frozen, uncertain what to make of what they had just heard. "He's lying," Shaw said, stepping forward. "This is psychological warfare. He's trying to destabilize you, make you doubt yourself." Kate's voice was distant, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. "Or maybe he's telling the truth. Maybe everything I've believed for 8 years has been wrong." She handed the radio back to Reeves and turned to the window. The city sprawled before her, dark and dangerous, full of enemies whose faces she could not see. But somewhere out there, one enemy had a face. One enemy had a name. One enemy had answers to questions she had been afraid to ask for almost a decade. "I need to talk to him," Kate said quietly. "Face to face. I need to understand what happened and why." "That's suicide," Shaw protested. "He's leading a team of professional killers. You walk out there, you die." "Maybe." Kate picked up her rifle and checked the magazine. 5 rounds remaining. "Or maybe he needs me alive. Maybe I'm the whole reason he's here, the whole reason this operation exists. Think about it, Commander. Why Detroit? Why now? Why target a senator who has nothing to do with military operations or special forces programs?" She looked at Shaw, and he saw the pieces coming together in her mind. "Victor chose this location because he knew I would come. He chose this senator because of a connection I haven't discovered yet. This entire operation is a message, Commander. A message meant specifically for me." "What kind of message?" Kate moved toward the stairs, her steps purposeful, her decision made. "An invitation. And I think it's time I accepted it." Gunnery Sergeant Webb intercepted her on the 2nd floor, the folder from her bag clutched in his hands. Kate saw it and stopped, her expression unreadable. her eyes fixed on the documents that contained the worst moments of her life. "You went through my things," she said. It was not a question. "I needed to understand who you are, who you really are." Webb held up the folder. "Phantom Edge, 11 dead, 1 survivor." He paused. "You." "Yes?" "And now the man who was supposed to die with them is alive, leading an army of killers, claiming that your own government set your team up to be slaughtered." "Yes." Webb studied her for a long moment. He was not a young man anymore, had seen enough in his 20 years of service to recognize truth when he encountered it. And what he saw in Kate Harlow's eyes was not deception. It was devastation. The look of someone who had built their entire understanding of the world on a foundation that was crumbling beneath their feet. "Do you believe him?" Webb asked. "Do you believe Victor?" Kate was silent for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I believe anymore, but I know I have to find out. I know I owe that to the 11 people who died in Syria. I know I owe that to myself." She met Webb's gaze. "And I know that until I understand what really happened, I can't be the person these Marines need me to be. So what are you going to do?" Kate took the folder from his hands, looked at the photograph of herself from 8 years ago, at the woman who had believed in honor and duty and the righteousness of her cause. That woman had died in Syria along with her team. The woman standing here now was something different, something harder, something that had been forged in guilt and loss and was only now beginning to understand the shape of its own transformation. "I'm going to finish what I started," she said. "I'm going to find Victor. I'm going to learn the truth. And then," she paused and something cold moved behind her eyes, "then I'm going to decide who deserves to pay for what happened to my people." She tucked the folder into her jacket and continued down the stairs, leaving Webb standing in the shadows of the abandoned building, wondering if he had just witnessed the beginning of a rescue mission or the first steps of a war that had been 8 years in the making. On the 3rd floor, Danny Reeves remained at the window, binoculars pressed to his eyes, scanning the darkness for enemies he was only beginning to learn how to see. The rifle Kate had left behind rested on the overturned table, its scope still warm from her touch, its barrel still carrying the faint smell of cordite. He thought about his grandfather, about the stories of Khe-Sanh, of holding a position against impossible odds, of watching friends die and choosing to keep fighting anyway. His grandfather had never talked about those experiences as heroic. He had talked about them as necessary, as the things that had to be done when all other options had been exhausted. Reeves understood now, in a way he never had before, what that meant. It meant looking into the darkness and choosing to face it. It meant carrying the weight of the dead and using that weight as fuel rather than anchor. It meant becoming something more than you were, because the alternative was becoming nothing at all. He picked up the rifle and settled it against his shoulder, mimicking the position he had watched Kate assume a dozen times over the past few hours. The weapon was heavier than he expected, more substantial, like holding a piece of history that had not yet been written. Through the scope, the city spread before him, dark buildings and empty streets, and somewhere, hiding in the shadows, men who wanted to kill everyone in this building. Men who followed a commander with a grudge against a woman who had just walked away. Men who did not know that a 19-year-old Marine from Tennessee, grandson of a Khe-Sanh survivor, had just decided to prove himself worthy of a legacy he was only beginning to understand. "I'm ready," Reeves whispered to no one in particular. "Whatever happens next, I'm ready." And somewhere in the darkness, Victor Cross smiled. Because everything was going exactly according to plan. Kate Harlow moved through the darkness like a memory of death. The streets of the Packard district stretched before her, a maze of broken concrete and rusted metal and shadows that seemed to breathe with malevolent intent. Every window was a potential threat. Every doorway could hide the muzzle of a rifle. Every step she took brought her closer to a confrontation she had been running from for 8 years. The moon hung low on the horizon, a pale sliver that provided just enough light to see the devastation around her. This had once been a neighborhood. Families had lived here, raised children here, built lives here. Now it was a wasteland, abandoned by a city that had lost the ability to care for its own. Detroit had died slowly over decades, its industrial heart stopping beat by beat as factories closed and jobs disappeared and hope drained away like water from a broken pipe. Kate understood that kind of death. She had experienced it herself in a different city, on a different continent, watching everything she loved bleed out in the dust of Syria. 7 snipers remained. 7 trained killers who knew she was coming, who had been watching her eliminate their comrades one by one, who were undoubtedly repositioning themselves at this very moment to intercept her approach. The odds were not in her favor. They never had been. But Kate had stopped calculating odds a long time ago. Odds were for people who planned to survive. Kate was operating on something different now, something that felt less like hope and more like obligation. She owed 11 people the truth. She owed them answers. And if finding those answers meant walking into the jaws of death itself, then so be it. She had been living on borrowed time since Syria. Every breath she had taken in the last 8 years had been stolen from friends who deserved to live more than she did. Thomas Rivera should have grown old and bounced grandchildren on his knee. Sarah Chen should have become the doctor she always dreamed of being after retiring from the service. Michael Kowalski should have opened that bar in Chicago and spent his evenings telling war stories to anyone who would listen. They should have lived. Kate should have died. That fundamental wrongness had haunted her for 8 years, and now it was driving her forward into the darkness. The October wind cut through her jacket as she crossed an intersection, her body low and fast, her movements unpredictable. No shot came. Either the snipers had lost track of her position, or Victor had ordered them to let her through. Kate suspected the latter. Victor wanted this meeting. He had orchestrated this entire operation to make it happen. He was not going to let his own men prevent the reunion he had been planning for 8 years. She ducked into an alley and pressed herself against a wall, taking a moment to catch her breath and assess her surroundings. The building she was heading toward loomed premium 3 blocks ahead, a massive industrial structure that had once housed an automobile parts factory. According to the intelligence Shaw had shared before she left, this was where the hostages were being held. This was Victor's command center. This was where everything would end, one way or another. Kate closed her eyes and let the memories come. She had tried so hard to forget. For 8 years, she had buried the past under layers of mundane routine, hiding in a cabin in Montana, working odd jobs that required nothing of her mind and everything of her body. She had chopped wood and repaired fences and helped neighbors with their livestock, filling her days with simple labor that left no room for thought. She had stopped watching the news, stopped reading newspapers, stopped engaging with a world that reminded her of everything she had lost. But the memories never truly faded. They lurked beneath the surface, waiting for quiet moments to emerge and remind her of what she had been, what she had done, what she had failed to do. Victor Cross. Even now, even knowing he was alive and leading an army of killers, she could not think of that name without feeling the ghost of affection that had once bound them together. They had met at the Phantom Edge selection course, 2 strangers from different branches of service, thrown together by a program that demanded the impossible and accepted nothing less than perfection. She remembered the first time she saw him, a tall man with dark hair going gray at the temples, standing at parade rest in a briefing room filled with the most dangerous operators in the American military. His eyes had found hers across the room, and something had passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, the acknowledgement of kindred spirits, the understanding that they were both here because they had nowhere else to go, because they had given everything to their country and were being asked to give more. The selection course had lasted 6 weeks. 12 candidates began. 8 made it through. Kate and Victor had been partnered on the 3rd day, forced to work together through a series of increasingly brutal exercises designed to break lesser soldiers. They had not broken. They had not even bent. Instead, they had discovered something rare and precious, a partnership that transcended individual capability, a combination that was greater than the sum of its parts. Victor thought in strategies. Kate thought in solutions. He saw the big picture. She saw the details. He planned the operations. She executed them flawlessly. Together, they had become the backbone of Phantom Edge, the leadership team that turned 12 exceptional individuals into something approaching legend. She remembered one particular exercise, a simulated hostage rescue in an urban environment, 48 hours of continuous operations with no sleep and minimal supplies. By the end, most of the candidates were hallucinating from exhaustion. Kate had stumbled on a stairway and nearly fallen 3 stories to the concrete below. Victor had caught her, held her until she found her footing, then continued the mission without a word. It was such a small thing, such a simple act of partnership, but it had cemented something between them. Trust, Absolute, unquestioning trust. She had believed in that trust for years. She had carried it into Syria like a talisman against death. And when everything fell apart, when the bullets started flying and the team started dying, she had looked for Victor and found only smoke and fire and the sounds of her friends being murdered. The trust had died in Syria, or so she had thought. Now she was walking toward the man she had trusted most, knowing he had become something she might have to destroy. And the weight of that knowledge was almost more than she could bear. And together they had walked into Syria. Kate opened her eyes and pushed the memories aside. There would be time for nostalgia later, assuming she survived the next few hours. Right now, she needed to focus. Right now, she needed to be the weapon she had trained herself to become. She moved out of the alley and continued her approach, using the terrain for cover, staying in shadows whenever possible. The factory grew larger as she approached, its broken windows staring down at her like the eyes of a giant that had been sleeping for decades and was only now beginning to stir. A sound from above made her freeze, the scrape of boot on concrete. Someone moving on a rooftop 2 buildings to her left. Kate tracked the sound, calculated the angle, estimated the distance. One of Victor's snipers, probably repositioning to cover her approach. She could take the shot if she wanted. The rifle she carried had enough range, and her skills had not diminished despite 8 years of disuse. But killing the sniper would alert Victor. It would tell him she was coming in hostile, that she had no intention of talking, that this was going to end in blood rather than words. And despite everything, despite the betrayal and the wounds and the 8 years of pain, Kate was not ready for that. Not yet. She needed to understand first. She needed to know why. She let the sniper live and continued forward. The factory entrance loomed before her, a massive loading dock that had once accepted deliveries from trucks carrying automotive components from across the Midwest. The doors were open, hanging off their hinges, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. Kate paused at the threshold and listened. Silence. But not the silence of an empty building. This was the silence of held breath, of people waiting, of tension coiled and ready to spring. They knew she was here. They were watching. Kate stepped inside. The interior of the factory was vast, a cathedral of industry that had been abandoned to tyranny and neglect. Massive machines stood like monuments to a bygone era, their surfaces covered in rust and dust in the accumulated grime of decades. Conveyor belts hung motionless, their rubber surfaces cracked and peeling. Light filtered through broken skylights far overhead, creating columns of pale illumination that only served to make the shadows deeper. And in the center of it all, seated on a chair that looked absurdly out of place in this industrial graveyard, was Victor Cross. He had aged. That was Kate's first thought. The dark hair she remembered was now almost entirely gray, and lines had carved themselves deep into a face that had once been handsome in a severe sort of way. He was thinner than she remembered, leaner, as if the years had burned away everything soft and left only the essential core. His hands, once steady enough to perform surgery in combat conditions, now bore the faint tremor of accumulated stress and insufficient sleep. But his eyes were the same, dark and intelligent and filled with a fierce intensity that had always made her feel like he could see through walls, through lies, through everything that separated the surface from the truth beneath. Those eyes had guided her through 100 operations. Those eyes had told her when to shoot and when to wait. Those eyes had been the last thing she saw before Syria consumed everything. He was unarmed, at least visibly. His hands rested on his knees, palms down, in a posture that was deliberately non-threatening. But Kate knew better than to trust appearances. Victor had always been more dangerous with his mind than with any weapon. He could calculate angles and outcomes faster than most people could breathe. He could anticipate enemy movements before the enemy knew they were going to move. He had been the tactical genius behind Phantom Edge, the mind that turned Kate's precision into something greater than individual skill. And now that mind was arrayed against her, plotting outcomes she could not predict, calculating angles she could not see. You came. His voice echoed in the vast space, carrying the same calm confidence she remembered from 1,000 briefings in 100 operations. I wasn't sure you would. After 8 years of hiding, I thought maybe you'd lost the nerve. Kate stopped 20 feet away from him, her rifle still held at the ready, her eyes scanning the shadows for threats she knew were there. I never lost the nerve. I lost the reason. And now you found it again. Now I have questions, Answers would be appreciated before one of us dies. Victor smiled, a thin expression that did not reach his eyes. Always direct. That's what I loved about you, Kate. No games, no pretense. Just straight to the heart of things. He gestured at the chair across from him, another piece of furniture that had no business being in a factory. Sit, please. We have much to discuss. I'll stand, as you wish. Victor leaned back, crossing his legs, assuming a posture of ease that was either genuine or the most convincing performance Kate had ever witnessed. I suppose you want to know how I survived. Among other things, it's not a complicated story. When the ambush began, I was separated from the main group, caught in a building that collapsed from mortar fire. I spent 36 hours buried under rubble, listening to our team die on the radio. His voice remained steady, but Kate saw something flicker in his eyes. Pain, perhaps, or the memory of pain. By the time I dug myself out, it was over. Everyone was dead, or so I thought. You thought I was dead? I thought everyone was dead. The extraction team never came. The building I was in had collapsed on top of me, and my transponder was destroyed. As far as command was concerned, there were no survivors. Victor paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had hardened. But I survived, and I started asking questions. Kate felt her grip tighten on her rifle. What kind of questions? The kind that get people killed. Victor stood slowly, his movements deliberate, giving her time to react if she chose to. She did not. How did the enemy know we were coming? How did they know our exact routes, our communication frequencies, our tactical playbook? At first, I assumed it was an intelligence failure, a mole somewhere in the system who had sold us out for money or ideology. He walked to a nearby window and looked out at the darkness beyond. His back was to her now, completely vulnerable. Either he trusted her not to shoot, or he no longer cared. But as I dug deeper, I realized the truth was much worse. This wasn't a failure. It wasn't a leak. It was a deliberate operation planned and executed by our own government. Kate's blood ran cold. She had heard these accusations before on the radio, but hearing them again, here in Victor's voice, made them feel more real, more terrible. Phantom Edge was a problem, Victor continued. We knew too much. We had been involved in operations that could never be acknowledged, had seen things that could never be revealed. And we had developed capabilities that certain people found threatening, an urban warfare doctrine that could be used against American cities as easily as foreign ones. 12 operators who could destabilize governments, assassinate world leaders, change the course of history with a few well-placed shots. He turned to face her, and Kate saw the rage that burned beneath his calm exterior. General Morrison decided we were too dangerous to exist. He made a deal with an arms broker named Yuri Volkov, a man with connections to the very terrorist networks we were sent to eliminate. In exchange for $2 billion worth of weapons contracts, Morrison gave Volkov everything: our deployment schedule, our tactical plans, our communication protocols. He sold us out, Kate. He murdered 11 of our friends for profit. Kate felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Everything she had believed for 8 years, every assumption she had made about Syria, was crumbling like the building around her. That's impossible, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Morrison was a patriot. He served this country for 40 years. Morrison served himself. The country was just a convenient cover. Victor walked toward her, stopping just out of arm's reach. I spent 3 years gathering evidence. 3 years tracking money, documenting meetings, finding witnesses who were willing to talk. I have enough to put Morrison in prison for the rest of his life. Enough to expose the entire rotten system that allowed this to happen. Then why didn't you? Why didn't you go to the FBI, the press, anyone who could help? Victor laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off the factory walls. Because I tried. I went to the FBI in 2019. 3 days later, my contact was dead, and I was being hunted by men with government credentials. I went to a reporter at the Washington Post. She disappeared before the story could run. Every door I tried to open slammed shut in my face. Morrison has protection, Kate. He has friends in every agency, every branch of government, every corner of the establishment. He's untouchable through normal channels. He gestured at the factory around them, at the darkness that held his army of snipers and killers. So I decided to create my own channel. Kate understood then. The hostages, the Marines, the entire operation that had consumed the Packard district. It was not terrorism, it was not ransom, it was leverage. Senator Morrison, she said slowly, he's the key. He's the weak link. The senator knows everything his father-in-law did. He's been covering for Morrison for 15 years, using his political influence to bury investigations and silence witnesses. But he's not a soldier. He's not trained to resist interrogation. With the right pressure, he'll break. He'll give us everything we need to expose the whole conspiracy. And the other hostages? The civilians? What happens to them? Victor's expression darkened. Collateral damage. I didn't want them involved, but Morrison's people moved faster than I expected. The senator was never supposed to have an entourage. He was supposed to be alone, vulnerable, easy to extract. When he showed up with 46 other people, I had to adapt. Adapt? Kate's voice dripped with contempt. You're holding innocent people hostage to get to one corrupt general. I'm doing what has to be done to avenge 11 murdered Americans. 11 of our friends, Kate, Thomas Rivera, Sarah Chen, Michael Kowalski. You remember their names, don't you? You remember their faces? They died because Morrison valued money over loyalty. They died screaming, afraid, alone in a foreign city that became their tomb. And the man responsible has never paid a single consequence. He retired with full honors. He plays golf with senators. He gives speeches about patriotism while the blood of our friends stains his hands. Victor stepped closer, close enough that Kate could see the pain behind his anger. Tell me I'm wrong, Kate. Tell me those 11 lives don't deserve justice. Tell me we should just let Morrison live out his golden years while our friends rot in graves that no one will ever find. Kate said nothing, because she could not, because every word Victor spoke resonated with a truth she had been trying to deny for 8 years. Morrison had destroyed them. Morrison had murdered their family, and Morrison had never answered for any of it. But the hostages, the civilians, the Marines dying in the streets outside, there has to be another way, she finally said. This can't be the answer. I spent 3 years looking for another way. This is what's left. Victor reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, a radio transmitter that looked military grade. In 2 hours, I'm going to broadcast the senator's confession live to every news network in the country. Every word, every detail, every crime Morrison committed in the name of national security, the world will know the truth. And then, whether I live or die, Morrison will finally face the consequences of what he did. And if the senator won't confess, Victor's eyes went cold. Then I'll give him motivation. Kate felt something shift inside her. For 8 years, she had carried the weight of 11 deaths, blamed herself for surviving when better people had not. For 8 years, she had believed that Syria was a tragedy, a failure, a wound that would never heal. But now she knew it was something worse. It was murder. Premeditated, calculated, sanctioned murder. And Victor was right. Morrison had never paid. But the price Victor was asking was too high. The hostages had done nothing wrong. The Marines bleeding out in the streets had done nothing wrong. Even the senator, as corrupt as he might be, deserved a trial rather than an execution. I can't let you hurt innocent people, Kate said. Not even for this. Then stop me. Victor spread his arms wide, an invitation and a challenge. You're the Specter, Kate, the deadliest sniper in American history. You could kill me right now, end this whole thing with a single shot. But you won't, because deep down you know I'm right. You know Morrison deserves to burn, and you know that if you stop me, he never will. Kate raised her rifle, sighting down the barrel at Victor's chest. Her finger found the trigger. 1 pound of pressure, and it would be over. 1 pound of pressure, and Victor Cross would join the list of people she had killed. But her finger did not move. I thought so, Victor said quietly. You're not here to stop me, Kate. You're here to understand. And now that you do, you have to make a choice. Help me expose Morrison and honor the memory of our fallen friends. Or walk away and let him keep getting away with murder. There's a third option. Victor raised an eyebrow. Oh? I stop you. I save the hostages. And I find another way to make Morrison pay. A way that doesn't involve innocent blood. That way doesn't exist. Maybe not yet, but I have something you don't. Kate lowered her rifle and looked Victor in the eye. I have time. Morrison isn't going anywhere, and neither am I, not until he faces justice for what he did. Victor studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he laughed, a genuine sound this time, filled with something that might have been admiration. Still the optimist, After everything you've seen, everything you've survived, you still believe the system works. No, I believe I work. I believe that 11 people died trusting me to lead them, and I owe them more than revenge. I owe them justice. Real justice, not this blood-soaked parody. And if you fail, if Morrison dies of old age in his bed, surrounded by grandchildren who think he's a hero, Kate felt the weight of that possibility settle on her shoulders. It was heavy, heavier than anything she had ever carried. But she had been carrying impossible burdens for 30 years. One more would not break her. Then I'll have failed, and I'll live with that failure for the rest of my life, just like I've been living with the failure of Syria. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was soft. But at least I won't have become the thing I hate. At least I won't have sacrificed innocent people to satisfy my own need for vengeance. Victor was silent for a long moment. The factory seemed to hold its breath around them, waiting for his response. You always were the better person, he finally said. Even when we were partners, even when we were fighting side by side, you had something I never did. A moral compass that actually worked. A sense of right and wrong that could survive anything. Victor, I lost that in Syria. His voice cracked just slightly, the first sign of vulnerability he had shown. When I heard them dying, when I couldn't help, when I realized that everything we believed was a lie, something broke inside me. Something I don't know how to fix. Let me help you fix it. Let the hostages go. Surrender to the Marines. I'll make sure your evidence gets to people who can use it. Morrison will face justice, Victor. I promise you that. Victor looked at her, and for just a moment, Kate saw the man she had once called her closest friend. The man who had stood beside her through impossible challenges, who had believed in her when no one else did, who had helped her become the soldier she was today. Then the moment passed, and the hardness returned to his eyes. I can't, he said simply. I've gone too far, killed too many people. Even if I wanted to surrender, even if I trusted your promise, there's no coming back from what I've done. The only way this ends is with Morrison's exposure or my death. Preferably both. It doesn't have to be that way. Yes, it does. For you, maybe there's still a path that leads somewhere good. But my path ended 8 years ago in Syria. Everything since then has just been the long walk toward the grave. He turned and walked back toward his chair, his movements suddenly tired, like a man who had been carrying a weight for too long and was finally feeling its full measure. I'm going to give you a choice, Kate. The same choice you've always had but never really faced. You can leave here, go back to your Marines, and try to stop me the hard way. My men will kill as many of you as they can. The hostages will probably die in the crossfire. Morrison will use the chaos to bury everything and emerge as the victim of a terrorist attack. Nothing will change except the body count. He sat down and looked at her with eyes that had seen too much and forgiven nothing. Or you can stay. Help me extract the senator's confession. Make sure the evidence gets broadcast properly, that the whole world sees what Morrison did. The hostages can be released once the broadcast is complete. No one else has to die. And when it's over, you can arrest me or kill me or do whatever your conscience demands. But Morrison will finally be exposed. Our friends will finally have justice. Kate stood in the darkness of the factory, the weight of 11 ghosts pressing down on her shoulders, and tried to find the right answer in a situation where no right answer existed. She thought about the Marines outside, about Shaw and Webb and young Danny Reeves, who had looked at her like she was some kind of savior. She thought about the hostages, 47 people whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. She thought about Morrison, a man she had never met but who had apparently orchestrated the murder of everyone she loved. And she thought about Victor, about the friend he had been and the monster he had become, about the line between justice and vengeance, between fighting for something and simply fighting. I need time, she said, time to think. You have 1 hour. After that, we begin the broadcast whether you're with us or not. Victor closed his eyes and suddenly he looked old, tired, like a man who had been fighting a war that no one could win. I hope you choose wisely, Kate, for both our sakes. Kate turned and walked toward the factory entrance, her mind spinning with possibilities and impossibilities. Behind her, Victor sat motionless in his chair, surrounded by darkness and dust and the ghosts of the people they had both failed. And somewhere in the building, hidden in shadows, 47 hostages waited to discover whether they would live or die based on the decision of a woman they had never met. The night was not over yet. But the hardest part was just beginning. When Kate emerged from the factory, she found Gunnery Sergeant Webb waiting for her. He was crouched in the shadow of a collapsed wall, rifle ready, eyes scanning the darkness for threats. When he saw her, something like relief flickered across his weathered features. "You're alive," he said simply. "So far." Kate moved to join him, pressing her back against the wall and taking a moment to gather her thoughts. "Shaw send you?" "I volunteered. Figured someone should watch your back while you were in there confronting your past." Webb paused. "I read the files. I know what happened in Syria, or at least I know what the official record says happened. The official record is a lie. Most official records are." Webb shifted his weight, his joints creaking in the cold. "What did he tell you, Victor? What does he want?" Kate told him. Everything. The conspiracy, the betrayal, Morrison's role in the death of Phantom Edge, Victor's plan to expose the truth through the senator's confession. Webb listened without interruption, his face growing grimmer with each revelation. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Do you believe him?" he finally asked. "I believe that 11 people are dead and someone is responsible. I believe that Morrison had the access and the motive to sell us out. And I believe that Victor has spent 8 years gathering evidence that could prove it." Kate paused. "What I don't believe is that killing more people is the answer. But you understand why he's doing it. Understanding isn't the same as agreeing." Webb nodded slowly. "In Korea, there was a sergeant in my father's unit named Kowalski. Not Michael, different man, but same type. The kind who would follow you into hell if you asked him to, not because he was stupid, but because he believed in something. He believed that what they were doing mattered, that the sacrifices meant something." He looked at Kate with eyes that had seen decades of service and loss. "He died believing that, died on a frozen hillside outside of Chosin, still shooting, still fighting, still believing. And my father carried that belief for the rest of his life. Carried it through the bad times when the war was forgotten, when nobody wanted to hear about Korea, when they called it the Forgotten War because the whole country just wanted to move on." Webb's voice softened. "Sometimes belief is all we have. Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps us going when everything else falls apart. Victor believes he's doing the right thing. You believe he's wrong. The question is, whose belief is going to win?" Kate considered his words. "You're saying I need to find a way to save the hostages without destroying Victor's purpose. I'm saying that a man who has lost everything except his mission will die for that mission. But if you can give him something else to hold on to, something that serves the same purpose through different means, you might be able to talk him down. He's past talking, he said so himself." "Then don't talk. Show him." Webb reached into his jacket and pulled out a small object, a flash drive that looked unremarkable but clearly held significance. "Before I came out here, I made some calls, old contacts from my intelligence days. One of them mentioned something interesting." Kate looked at the drive. "What is it?" "A name. Julian Mercer. He's an investigative journalist with a reputation for exposing government corruption. 3 years ago, he was working on a story about illegal arms deals in the Middle East. The story got killed before it could run, but my contact says Mercer never gave up. He's been gathering evidence ever since, waiting for the right moment to publish." "And you think this evidence connects to Morrison?" "I think there's a chance, and I think that chance is better than watching more people die in a crossfire that won't change anything." Webb pressed the drive into Kate's hand. "Victor wants justice. This might be a way to give it to him without burning down the world in the process." Kate looked at the drive, felt its weight in her palm. Such a small thing, such a fragile hope. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You're a Marine. Your loyalty should be to Shaw, to the Corps, to the mission, not to me." Webb smiled, a tired expression that spoke of too many years and too much loss. "Because I've spent 20 years following orders, and most of those orders were right, but some of them weren't. Some of them got good people killed for bad reasons. And I followed them anyway because that's what soldiers do. We follow orders. We trust the system. We believe that the people above us know what they're doing." He looked toward the factory where Victor waited. "But every once in a while, you meet someone who reminds you that the system isn't perfect. That the people above us are just people capable of mistakes and lies and betrayals. And when that happens, you have to decide what matters more, following orders or doing what's right." Webb stood, his knees popping audibly. "I've made my decision. Now you need to make yours." Kate returned to find Lieutenant Commander Shaw organizing the Marines for an assault. They had repositioned during her absence, moving from the commercial building to a more defensible structure closer to the factory. 30 Marines remained, wounded and exhausted, but still combat ready, still willing to fight and die for their country. Shaw looked up as Kate approached, his face a mask of professional concern. You were gone for 2 hours. I was about to send a team after you. I was talking to Victor. And Kate told him what she had learned, leaving nothing out. The conspiracy, the betrayal, the choice Victor had offered her. When she finished, Shaw's expression had not changed, but something in his eyes had hardened. He murdered Marines, Shaw said. Whatever his reasons, whatever justification he thinks he has, he killed Americans. My people. That can't be forgiven. I'm not asking you to forgive him. I'm asking you to help me find another way. There is no other way. We go in, we neutralize the hostiles, we rescue the hostages. That's our mission. That's what we're trained to do. And how many more Marines die in that assault? How many hostages get caught in the crossfire? Victor has 7 snipers positioned throughout that factory, all of them trained by the same program that trained me. You go in there guns blazing, you'll lose half your men before you reach the first floor. Shaw's jaw tightened. He knew she was right. He just did not want to admit it. Then what do you suggest? Kate held up the flash drive Webb had given her. I suggest we give Victor what he wants. Not through violence, not through hostages, but through journalism. There's a reporter named Julian Mercer who has been investigating the same corruption Victor is trying to expose. If we can get Victor's evidence to Mercer, if we can show him that there's a legitimate path to justice, we might be able to talk him down. You want to negotiate with a terrorist. I want to save 47 hostages and 30 Marines. If that means negotiating with someone you call a terrorist, then yes, that's exactly what I want. Shaw was silent for a long moment. Around him, the Marines watched and waited, their futures hanging on the decision of their commander. Ma'am, a voice from behind. Danny Reeves stepped forward, the rifle Kate had given him still clutched in his hands. Permission to speak. Shaw nodded. I don't know anything about conspiracies or corrupt generals or any of that stuff. I'm 19 years old and this is my first deployment, but I know that my grandfather taught me one thing before he died. Reeves's voice was steady, stronger than it had been hours ago. He said that being a Marine isn't about following orders blindly. It's about protecting people who can't protect themselves. Those hostages in there, sir, they can't protect themselves. And if there's a way to save them without more Marines dying, isn't that worth trying? Shaw looked at the young man, at the determination in his eyes, at the legacy he was trying to honor. Something shifted in the commander's expression. 1 hour, Shaw said finally. You have 1 hour to make contact with this reporter, to convince Victor there's another way. After that, regardless of what progress you've made, we go in. My men have already lost too much tonight. I won't let them lose everything. Kate nodded. 1 hour, that's all I need. She turned to leave, then paused and looked back at Reeves. Your grandfather would be proud of you, Danny. Remember that, whatever happens next. Then she was gone, disappearing into the darkness with a flash drive in her pocket and the fate of 47 hostages resting on her shoulders. The hour began. The hour began with a phone call that would change everything. Kate crouched in the shell of a burned-out delivery truck, her fingers working the satellite phone that Webb had pressed into her hands along with the flash drive. The device was military-grade, encrypted, capable of reaching anywhere in the world without being traced. It was the kind of equipment that cost more than most people made in a year, and Webb had produced it like a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat. She did not ask where he got it. Some questions were better left unasked. In 20 years of service, Webb had accumulated contacts and favors and debts that spanned agencies and continents. When a man like that offered you a tool, you used it and thanked him later. The night pressed in around her, cold and hostile, filled with the sounds of a dying city. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Closer, the wind whistled through broken windows and collapsed roof lines, creating a mournful symphony that seemed to mourn for everyone who had ever lived and died in this place. Detroit had seen so much death over the decades. The death of industry, the death of hope, the death of the American dream itself, rotting in the streets of a city that had once built the machines that built a nation. Kate pushed those thoughts aside and focused on the phone. One number, one chance, 1 hour to change the trajectory of a night that was rapidly spiraling toward catastrophe. Julian Mercer answered on the third ring. His voice was rough with sleep and suspicion. The voice of a man who had learned to distrust unexpected calls in the middle of the night. 3 years of investigating government corruption had taught him that phones could be weapons, that voices could be traps, that every conversation could be the one that ended your career or your life. Who is this? Someone who has information you've been looking for. Information about Operation Phantom Edge and General Harrison Morrison. Silence. Kate could almost hear the gears turning in Mercer's head, calculating risks and rewards, weighing the possibility of a trap against the promise of the story he had been chasing for years. She had read his work before making the call. 3 Pulitzer nominations, 2 books on military corruption, a reputation for fearlessness that bordered on recklessness. If anyone could take on Morrison and win, it was Julian Mercer. I'm listening. Kate talked. She talked about Syria, about the ambush, about 11 dead Americans and the man who had sold them out. She talked about Victor Cross and his army of snipers, about the senator held hostage in an abandoned factory, about the conspiracy that connected them all. She talked until her throat was raw and her voice was hoarse, pouring 8 years of pain and guilt and unanswered questions into the ears of a stranger who might be her only hope. When she finished, Mercer was quiet for a long moment. If what you're telling me is true, this is the biggest government scandal since Watergate. Maybe bigger. It's true, every word. I'll need proof, documentation, testimony, something I can verify independently. I have evidence. Victor Cross has more. If I can convince him to hand it over, to trust the journalistic process instead of his own methods, we can expose Morrison without anyone else dying. And if you can't convince him, Kate looked toward the factory, its dark bulk rising against the gray sky like a monument to everything that had gone wrong in her life. Then a lot of people are going to die tonight, and Morrison will probably get away with murder. Again. Mercer was silent for another long moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed. The suspicion was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like determination. I've spent 3 years on this story. 3 years watching sources disappear, watching doors slam in my face, watching the system protect one of its own at the expense of the truth. If there's even a chance that what you're telling me is real, I can't walk away from it. So you'll help? I'll do more than help. I'll put everything I have behind this story, but I need something from you first. Name it. I need you to survive the night. Dead sources don't give interviews. Kate almost laughed. Almost. I'll do my best. She ended the call and sat in the darkness of the truck, feeling the weight of what she was about to attempt. Mercer was a lifeline, a path to justice that did not require blood. But getting Victor to accept that path would require something Kate was not sure she possessed anymore. It would require trust. The same trust that had been shattered in Syria, buried under rubble and bodies, and 8 years of guilt. The same trust that Victor himself had destroyed by becoming the thing he claimed to fight against. Could she trust him enough to offer him redemption? Could he trust her enough to accept it? There was only one way to find out. Kate moved through the darkness toward the factory, her rifle held ready, her senses alert to every shadow and sound. The hour Shaw had given her was ticking away, each minute bringing her closer to a deadline that could end in massacre. She had perhaps 40 minutes left, 40 minutes to change Victor's mind, 40 minutes to save 47 hostages and 30 Marines and one man she used to call her closest friend. The odds were not good, but Kate had never been one to bet on odds. She was halfway to the factory when the first shot came. It missed her head by inches, close enough that she felt the wind of its passage against her cheek. Kate dove behind a concrete barrier, her heart hammering, her mind racing to calculate the angle of fire. Northwest, high elevation. One of Victor's remaining snipers, positioned to cover the approach to the main building. The sound of the shot rolled across the ruins like thunder, bouncing off buildings and returning in echoes that made it impossible for an untrained ear to locate the source. But Kate's ear was far from untrained. 30 years of hunting and being hunted had given her an instinct for gunfire that went beyond conscious thought. She knew where that shot came from, the same way she knew her own heartbeat. Another shot. This one struck the concrete near her feet, sending chips of debris spraying across her legs. The sniper was good, very good. But Kate was better. She had to be. Good was not enough anymore. Good would get her killed. She had taught herself to think like a sniper decades ago, to understand the calculus of angles and distances and human psychology that governed this most intimate form of warfare. A sniper was not just a marksman. A sniper was a hunter, a predator, a creature of patience and precision, who killed not with passion, but with cold, mathematical certainty. Her first instructor at Quantico had been a man named Sergeant Major Patterson, a Desert Storm veteran who had spent months in the Iraqi desert killing enemy soldiers from distances that should have been impossible. He had taught her that sniping was not about the gun, it was about the mind. The gun was just a tool, like a hammer or a screwdriver. What mattered was the brain behind it, the ability to calculate, to predict, to understand your target so completely that killing became almost an afterthought. Kate had absorbed those lessons like a sponge absorbing water. She had become what Patterson called a natural, someone for whom the mathematics of death came as easily as breathing. Some people were born to paint. Some were born to write. Kate had been born to shoot, and accepting that truth had been one of the hardest things she had ever done. And the first rule of hunting was understanding your prey. Kate analyzed the shots. 2 rounds, both near misses, both fired from the same position. The sniper was good enough to get close, but not good enough to anticipate her movements. That meant he was operating on standard training, following the doctrine Kate herself had written years ago. He was predictable. Predictable could be exploited. Kate waited, counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On 6, she moved, not where the sniper expected. Not backward, toward cover. Forward, toward the threat, zigzagging across open ground in a pattern that violated every instinct of self-preservation, but exploited the one weakness in her own doctrine, the assumption that targets would seek safety rather than aggression. The sniper fired, missed, fired again, missed again. Kate found cover behind a collapsed wall, brought her rifle up, and took aim at the window where the muzzle flashes had originated. She could not see the sniper, could not identify the target, but she did not need to. She knew where he would be. She knew because she had taught him to be there. The shot echoed across the ruins. 800 yards away, a shadow jerked and fell. 11 down, 6 remaining. Kate did not allow herself time to feel anything about the kill. This was not murder. This was mathematics. Each enemy eliminated improved the odds for the hostages, for the Marines, for everyone who might survive this night if Kate could do the impossible one more time. She continued toward the factory. 2 more snipers tried to stop her. 2 more snipers failed. The first was positioned in a water tower 3 blocks from the factory, using the elevated position to cover the western approach. Kate spotted him through his scope glint, the faint reflection of moonlight on glass that betrayed his position. She took the shot from 600 yards, adjusting for wind and elevation, and watched him tumble from the tower like a rag doll thrown by a careless child. The second was more clever. He had positioned himself in a basement, firing through a narrow window that provided excellent cover while limiting his exposure. But limited exposure also meant limited field of view, and Kate used that limitation against him. She circled around, found an angle he could not cover, and put a round through the back of his skull before he knew she was there. 13 down, 4 remaining, plus Victor. Kate reached the factory perimeter with 25 minutes left on Shaw's deadline. The building loomed before her, dark and silent, its broken windows staring down like the eyes of a corpse. Somewhere inside, Victor waited. Somewhere inside, 47 hostages prayed for rescue. Somewhere inside, the truth about Syria lay buried under years of lies and misdirection. Kate was going to dig it up, whatever the cost. She entered through a side door, moving silent as a ghost through corridors that had not seen legitimate use in decades. Dust covered every surface, disturbed only by footprints that told the story of recent passage. Victor's men had been here. Victor himself had walked these halls, planning and plotting, setting up the operation that would either expose a monster or create a bloodbath. The hostages were on the 2nd floor. Kate could hear them, faint sounds of breathing and movement that filtered through the floorboards above her head. 47 people, bound and afraid, their lives hanging on decisions made by people they would never meet. They did not know about Phantom Edge or Syria or the conspiracy that had brought them to this moment. They were innocent in every meaningful sense of the word. Kate allowed herself to think about them as individuals, if only for a moment. The senator whose father-in-law had orchestrated the murder of 11 Americans. The camera crews and reporters who had been documenting an urban renewal project. The local officials who had come to support their senator's vision for Detroit's future. Administrative assistants. Security personnel. a catering staff that had been preparing refreshments when the attack began. 47 lives, 47 families waiting for news, 47 stories that could end tonight if Kate made the wrong decision. She would not let them die for sins they had not committed. She climbed the stairs carefully, testing each step for noise, her rifle ready to engage threats that could appear from any direction. The building groaned around her, settling into its decay, protesting the weight of the armed men who had invaded its corpse. Every sound was amplified in the darkness. Every shadow held potential death. The second floor opened into a vast space that had once been a manufacturing area, now converted into a makeshift prison. The hostages were gathered in the center, surrounded by armed guards who watched them with the bored attention of men who had been standing post too long. Kate studied the guards from her concealed position. They were professionals. That much was clear. Their equipment was military grade, their positioning tactically sound, their alertness maintained despite the long hours. Victor had recruited well. These were not street criminals or desperate amateurs. These were trained soldiers, probably veterans of private military companies who had found their way into Victor's orbit through shared grievance in the promise of righteous vengeance. Kate counted 5 guards, plus the 4 remaining snipers who were positioned somewhere in the building, plus Victor, whose location she still did not know. 10-1 odds. She had faced worse. In Syria, she had faced worse and lost. The memory of that failure burned in her chest like a coal that would never cool. But facing worse did not mean she wanted to, and killing these guards would almost certainly result in dead hostages, caught in crossfire they could not escape. There had to be another way. Kate pulled back from the doorway and considered her options. Direct assault was suicide. The guards were positioned to cover each other, their fields of fire overlapping in a pattern that left no safe approach. Even if Kate could take down 3 or 4 of them, the survivors would have time to kill hostages before she could stop them. Stealth was equally impractical. The manufacturing floor was too open, too exposed, with no cover that would allow her to approach undetected. The guards were alert, scanning constantly, trained to spot exactly the kind of infiltration Kate would need to attempt, which left only one option: negotiation. Kate keyed her radio to the frequency Victor had used earlier. "Victor, I'm in the building. We need to talk." Static. Then his voice, calm and unsurprised. "I know you're here, Kate. I've been watching you since you left the Marine position. 3 more of my men dead. Impressive. 4. You miscounted." A soft laugh. "The water tower. I'd hoped Marcus would be faster. He wasn't. None of them were fast enough. And neither are the ones you have left. You know how this ends, Victor. Either we talk, or I keep killing until there's no one left to protect you." Bold words from a woman who's outnumbered and outgunned. I've been outnumbered and outgunned before. It didn't stop me then. It won't stop me now. Silence stretched across the radio frequency. Kate waited, her heart pounding, her mind racing through scenarios and counter-scenarios. Victor was thinking, calculating, deciding whether to take the bait or spring his own trap. "Come to the control room," he finally said. "3rd floor, east wing. We'll talk." "The guards? They'll let you pass. But Kate," his voice hardened, "this is the last conversation we're going to have. Make it count." Kate climbed to the 3rd floor, passing guards who watched her with hostile eyes but made no move to stop her. They had received their orders. For now, she was protected. But that protection could evaporate in an instant at Victor's command, and Kate would find herself trapped in a building full of enemies with no way out. She was betting everything on the possibility that Victor still wanted to be saved, that somewhere beneath the rage and pain and 8 years of planning, the man she had once trusted was still alive. It was a desperate bet, but desperate was all she had left. The control room had once been an executive office overlooking the factory floor through large windows that now served as observation posts for Victor's operation. He stood with his back to her as she entered, his attention focused on something beyond the glass. "Did you know that I dreamed about this moment?" His voice was soft, almost contemplative. "For 8 years, I dreamed about bringing you here, showing you what I'd built, making you understand why it had to be this way." Kate kept her rifle ready, though she did not aim it at him. Not yet. "I understand why you're angry. I understand why you want Morrison to pay. But this isn't the way, Victor. This will only create more pain, more death, more reasons for the cycle to continue." The cycle. He turned to face her. and Kate saw something in his eyes that she had not seen before. Exhaustion. Deep, bone-weary exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue into something spiritual. You know what I've learned in 8 years of fighting this war, Kate? I've learned that the cycle never stops. Not through justice, not through forgiveness, not through anything except extinction. The only way to end corruption is to destroy the corrupt. Root and branch, no exceptions. And the innocent people who get caught in the crossfire, what about them? Acceptable loss is the same calculation Morrison made when he sold us out. The same calculation every general makes when they send young men to die for abstract concepts like freedom and democracy. Victor's voice grew bitter. At least I'm honest about what I'm doing. At least I don't wrap my murders in flags and call them patriotism. Kate felt the flash drive in her pocket, heavy with the weight of an alternative she was not sure Victor would accept. There's another way. A journalist named Julian Mercer has been investigating Morrison for years. I spoke to him tonight. He's willing to publish everything, to expose the whole conspiracy if we give him the evidence. Journalism. Victor laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the walls. You think journalism can touch Morrison? You think a newspaper article is going to bring down a four-star general with connections in every corner of the government? It's worked before. Watergate, Iran-Contra, Abu Ghraib. The truth has power, Victor. More power than bullets. And how many people died waiting for those truths to come out? How many lives were destroyed while journalists gathered evidence and lawyers filed motions and the system ground on at its glacial pace? Victor shook his head. I don't have time for the slow justice of institutions, Kate. I don't have the luxury of faith in a system that has already proven it will protect monsters like Morrison at any cost. So your answer is to become a monster yourself? The words hung in the air between them. Victor's face went rigid, his eyes flashing with something that might have been anger or pain or both. I became a monster the day I crawled out of that rubble in Syria. The day I realized that everything I believed was a lie, that the country I served had sacrificed me and everyone I loved for money and political convenience. The monster you see now is just the natural result of that betrayal. Kate lowered her rifle, not to surrender but to show that she was not here as an enemy. Not entirely. I know what it's like to feel betrayed. I know what it's like to carry guilt that doesn't belong to you, to wake up every morning wondering why you survived when better people died. I've spent 8 years living with that weight, Victor. 8 years trying to outrun a past that never stops chasing me. She stepped closer, close enough to see the lines of pain etched into his face, close enough to recognize the broken man beneath the militant facade. But I also know that becoming the thing you hate doesn't make the pain go away. It just spreads it around, creates new victims, new grudges, new cycles of revenge that will continue long after we're both dead. Morrison is a monster. I believe that now. But the answer to monsters isn't more monsters. The answer is light, truth, exposure. Victor was silent for a long moment. Kate could see the conflict in his eyes, the war between the man he had been and the creature he had become. For just an instant, she thought she saw a crack in his armor, a glimpse of the friend she had lost. Then the crack closed and the hardness returned. You always were the idealist, he said quietly. Even in Phantom Edge, even when we were training for missions that would never be acknowledged, you believed that what we were doing mattered, that we were the good guys fighting the good fight. I still believe that. I have to. I believed it too. Once. Victor turned back to the window, looking down at the factory floor where the hostages huddled in fear. Then Syria happened, and I learned the truth. We were never the good guys, Kate. We were just useful tools, wielded by people who would discard us the moment we became inconvenient. Morrison threw us away like broken equipment, and the system that was supposed to protect us helped him cover it up. He pressed his hand against the glass, and Kate saw that his fingers were trembling. I can't let that stand. I can't let him win, even if it costs me everything, even if it makes me the very thing I swore to destroy. Kate felt the moment slipping away. Victor was retreating into his fortress of rage and pain, sealing himself off from the possibility of redemption. In a few more seconds, the window would close forever, and there would be nothing left but violence. She had one card left to play. One desperate gamble that might break through his defenses or destroy any chance of a peaceful resolution. What if I told you there's a survivor, someone else from Phantom Edge who made it out of Syria alive? Victor went absolutely still. That's impossible. I saw the reports. I tracked down every piece of information I could find. Everyone died, everyone except you and me. The reports were wrong or deliberately falsified. Kate pulled the flash drive from her pocket and held it up. I have information that suggests at least one other member of the team survived. Someone who could corroborate everything, who could testify against Morrison, who could help bring him down through legitimate channels. Victor turned slowly, his eyes fixed on the drive like a drowning man staring at a lifeline. Who survived? I don't know yet. The information is incomplete. But if we work together, if we combine your evidence with what Mercer has already gathered, we might be able to find them. We might be able to build a case that even Morrison's friends can't ignore. The silence stretched for an eternity. Kate watched Victor's face, searching for some sign of which way he would fall. Hope warred with suspicion in his eyes, the desire to believe warred with 8 years of betrayal and disappointment. You're lying, he finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. This is a trick, another manipulation from people who want me dead. I'm not lying, Victor. I've never lied to you. Not in Phantom Edge. Not in Syria. Not now. Kate stepped closer, close enough to touch him if she dared. We were partners once, friends. The closest thing to family either of us had. That has to count for something. Victor's eyes met hers and Kate saw the mask finally crack. Behind it was not a monster. Behind it was a man in agony, a man who had lost everything and convinced himself that destruction was the only response to loss. I want to believe you, he whispered. God help me, I want to believe there's another way. But every time I've trusted someone in the last 8 years, they've betrayed me. Every time I've reached for hope, it's turned to ashes in my hands. Then let me prove it. Give me time. Let the hostages go. Work with me instead of against me. If I'm lying, if there's no survivor, if the journalist path leads nowhere, you can always go back to your original plan. Morrison isn't going anywhere. But if I'm right, if there's even a chance I'm right, you could have justice without becoming a murderer. The moment hung suspended, fragile as glass, ready to shatter at the slightest wrong word. Then a radio crackled. One of Victor's lieutenants, his voice tight with urgency. Sir, we have movement. The Marines are advancing on our position. Multiple contacts coming in from the north and west. Kate's heart sank. Shaw's deadline. The hour was up, and the Marines were coming whether Victor surrendered or not. Victor's expression hardened. It seems your friends have decided to force the issue. Victor, wait, I can call them off. I can buy us more time. Time is a luxury we'd no longer have. He keyed his radio. All units, prepare to repel assault. Move the hostages to the secondary location. Anyone who resists is expendable. No, Kate grabbed his arm. You promised me we would talk. You said this was our last conversation. We haven't finished. Victor looked at her, hand on his arm, then at her face. For just an instant, something softened in his expression. Something that might have been regret. We finished 8 years ago, Kate, in Syria. Everything since then has just been the echo of what we lost. He pulled free of her grip and walked toward the door. If you want to save the hostages, you'd better work fast. My men have orders to execute them if the building is breached. Victor! He paused at the doorway, his back to her. There's something I should tell you. Something I've been saving for the right moment. Kate felt a chill run down her spine. What? You asked about survivors. You wanted to know if anyone else made it out of Syria. Victor turned his head, just enough for her to see the ghost of a smile on his lips. I found one 3 years ago. I've been keeping him safe ever since. Kate's blood ran cold. Who? Who did you find? Thomas Rivera. Ghost. He's alive, Kate. He's been alive this whole time, and he's here, in this building, waiting to see you again. The world tilted beneath Kate's feet. Thomas Rivera. Ghost. The man who had been her spotter for 5 years, who had watched her back through 100 missions, who had died screaming on the radio while she ran away like a coward. Alive. The memories crashed over her like a wave. Thomas teaching her to read wind patterns through the movement of grass. Thomas making her laugh during the endless hours of observation that preceded every shot. Thomas holding her after her father died, saying nothing because nothing needed to be said, just being there, solid and dependable and absolutely trustworthy. She remembered his voice on the radio in Syria, the calm professionalism giving way to panic, the sound of gunfire in the background, the words that had haunted her for 8 years. Kate, they're coming, they're everywhere, I can't hold them. Get out, Kate, get out now. And then the scream. The terrible, endless scream that had cut off mid-breath, leaving only static in the sound of her own ragged breathing as she ran away from her dying friends. She had carried that scream for 8 years. It had been the soundtrack of her nightmares, the ghost that followed her through every waking moment, the reminder of everything she had failed to do. Thomas Rivera was dead because she had not been there to save him. Thomas Rivera was dead because she had chosen survival over loyalty. Except he was not dead. He was alive. He was here. "You're lying," she breathed. But even as she said it, she knew he was not. Victor's cruelty had always been precise, calculated, designed to achieve maximum effect. A lie this big would serve no purpose unless it was true. He lost his legs in the ambush, spent 2 years in a hospital that doesn't officially exist, being interrogated by people who wanted to know what he knew about Phantom Edge. "I found him, Kate. I rescued him. I've been protecting him ever since, keeping him hidden from Morrison's people, waiting for the right moment to use him as leverage." "Leverage?" Kate's voice cracked with emotion. "Ghost is our friend, our brother, and you've been using him as leverage?" "I've been keeping him alive, which is more than the government did, more than you did." Victor's voice carried no accusation, only a simple statement of fact that hurt worse than any blame. "Thomas knows everything, Kate. He was Morrison's prisoner for months before I extracted him. He heard things, saw things, was told things that would destroy Morrison if they ever came to light. He's the key to everything." "Then let me see him. Let me talk to him." "You will. But first, you're going to help me deal with the Marines who are about to storm this building. Because if they breach, if this turns into a firefight, Thomas dies, the hostages die. Everyone dies." Victor stepped through the doorway and disappeared into the shadows. "You have 5 minutes to decide whose side you're on, Kate. Choose wisely." Kate stood alone in the control room, her mind reeling with the implications of what she had just learned. Thomas was alive. Her partner, her friend, the man whose death she had mourned for 8 years, was somewhere in this building, breathing, waiting, alive. And Victor had been using him, manipulating him, turning him into a weapon in a war that should never have been fought. The rage that surged through Kate was unlike anything she had felt since Syria. It was cold and clean and absolutely focused, the rage of a warrior who had finally found a target worthy of her skills. Victor had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. He had taken something precious, something sacred, and twisted it into a tool of his own vengeance. But beneath the rage was something else. Hope, desperate, irrational hope that maybe, just maybe, not everything had been lost in that city 8 years ago. That some small piece of the family she had loved had survived the flames. Thomas Rivera, Ghost, the nickname she had given him during their first deployment together, when she had watched him move through an enemy compound, like smoke, like shadow, like something that existed only in the peripheral vision of his targets. He had hated the name at first, said it made him sound like he was already dead, but over time, he had grown into it, had made it his own, had become the ghost in truth as well as name. And now he was alive, broken perhaps, changed certainly, but alive. She had to find Thomas. She had to see him, touch him, confirm that he was real and not another ghost conjured by Victor's manipulation. She had to hear his voice again, the quiet Tennessee drawl that had talked her through 1,000 difficult shots, that had kept her sane during the worst moments of their shared service. But to do that, she had to survive the next 5 minutes. She had to stop the Marines from breaching. She had to prevent a bloodbath that would kill everyone she was trying to save. Kate keyed her radio to the Marine frequency. "Shaw, this is Harlow. I need you to hold your assault." Shaw's voice came back sharp with tension. "Ma'am, the deadline has passed. We're moving in. I have new information, critical information. There's another survivor from Phantom Edge. He's being held in this building. If you breach, he dies along with the hostages." Silence. Then Shaw's voice again, more uncertain now. "How do I know this isn't a trick? How do I know you haven't been turned?" "You don't. You have to trust me. The same way I trusted you to give me that hour. The same way your men trusted you to lead them into this nightmare. Trust is all we have left, Commander. It's the only thing that separates us from the monsters." Kate could hear the weight of command in the silence that followed. Shaw was a good officer. He cared about his men. He wanted to bring them home alive. But he also understood that sometimes the right decision was not the easy decision. Sometimes trust was the only path forward. More silence. Kate could almost hear Shaw weighing the options, calculating the risks, deciding whether to follow his orders or follow his instincts. 10 minutes, he finally said. I'll give you 10 more minutes. But if I don't hear from you by then, we're coming in regardless. Understood. And Shaw, Danny Reeves, keep him out of the assault. He's too young to die in a crossfire. I'll do my best. But Reeves has been volunteering for point position since you left. Kid's got more courage than sense. Kate smiled despite everything. Sounds like someone I used to know. She ended the transmission and moved toward the door Victor had exited through. Somewhere in this building, Thomas Rivera waited. Somewhere in this building, the answers she had been seeking for 8 years were finally within reach. And somewhere in this building, Victor Cross was preparing for a final confrontation that would determine whether anyone walked out alive. The game of shadows was reaching its climax, and Kate Harlow was done playing by anyone's rules but her own. She checked her rifle. 4 rounds remaining. 4 chances to change the course of events. 4 bullets standing between life and death for everyone in this building. It would have to be enough. 4 rounds had been enough before. In Fallujah, she had stopped an ambush with 3 rounds. In Kandahar, she had broken a siege with 2. The number did not matter. What mattered was the will behind the weapon, the determination to see the mission through no matter the cost. Kate stepped through the doorway and into the darkness beyond, following the path Victor had taken, following the trail that would lead her to Thomas or to her own death. The factory stretched around her like a mem, corridors branching off in every direction, stairs leading up and down into shadows that could hide an army. She moved on instinct now, letting her training guide her feet while her mind processed everything she had learned. Thomas was alive. Morrison was a traitor. Victor was a monster created by the very system he fought against. And somewhere in the intersection of those truths was a path that led to justice without more innocent blood. She just had to find it before time ran out. The next 10 minutes would determine everything. And deep in the heart of the factory, Thomas Rivera sat in his wheelchair and prayed that the woman he had once called his best friend would find him before it was too late. His legs were gone, taken by the same betrayal that had taken everything else. But his mind remained sharp, and his faith in Kate Harlow had never wavered. She would come for him. She always had before. And this time he was ready to tell her everything. His prayers were about to be answered, but not in the way he expected, not in the way anyone expected. Kate found Thomas Rivera in a room that had once been a foreman's office, tucked away in the eastern corner of the factory where the morning light would have streamed through windows that no longer held glass. The space was small, utilitarian, filled with the ghosts of a working class that had built America with their hands and been abandoned when those hands were no longer needed. The door creaked as Kate pushed it open, the sound impossibly loud in the silence of the factory. She had faced death 100 times. She had killed more enemies than she could count. She had walked through fire and come out the other side scarred but standing. But nothing in her 30 years of service had prepared her for this moment. Nothing had prepared her to see a ghost come back to life. Thomas sat in a wheelchair near the far wall, his back to the door, his attention focused on something Kate could not see. She stopped in the doorway, her breath catching in her throat, her heart pounding with an intensity that made her feel like a recruit on her first deployment rather than a veteran of 30 years. He looked smaller than she remembered. The man who had been her spotter, her partner, her closest friend in the world, had been diminished by the years and the horrors he had endured. His shoulders, once broad and strong, now curved inward as if protecting something fragile. His hair had gone completely gray, and the hands that rested on the arms of his wheelchair bore scars that spoke of injuries Kate did not want to imagine. She remembered those hands as they had been, strong and steady, capable of holding a spotting scope for hours without trembling, capable of adjusting for windage and elevation with the precision of a surgeon. Those hands had saved her life more times than she could count, had signaled warnings when words would have given away their position, had pulled her to safety when bullets flew too close. Now those hands were broken, scarred, testaments to suffering that Kate could only imagine. But it was him. Despite everything, despite the changes wrought by time and torture, it was undeniably Thomas Rivera. Ghost, the man she had mourned for 8 years, the man whose death she had carried like a stone in her chest, weighing her down with every step, every breath, every moment of every day since Syria. I wondered how long it would take you to find me. His voice was the same, that quiet Tennessee drawl that had talked her through 1,000 difficult shots. that had kept her calm when everything around them was exploding into chaos. Kate felt tears prick at her eyes, tears she had not allowed herself to shed since Syria. Thomas, her voice broke on his name. God, Thomas, I thought you were dead. He turned the wheelchair to face her, and Kate saw what 8 years of captivity had done to him. His face was gaunt, lined with pain that had become permanent. His legs ended just above the knees, the stumps covered by the fabric of military surplus pants that had been cut and hemmed to fit his new reality. But his eyes were the same, dark and warm, and filled with an intelligence that had always seen more than he let on. I was dead, he said simply. For a while, the doctors brought me back 3 times before they gave up trying to let me go. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Stubborn, they called me. I preferred determined. Kate crossed the rope in 3 strides and knelt beside his wheelchair, taking his scarred hands in hers. She did not know what to say. There were no words adequate to the moment, no phrases that could bridge the gulf of 8 years in untold suffering. So she said nothing. She just held his hands and let the tears fall. Thomas watched her cry with an expression that held no judgment, no accusation, only a profound and gentle understanding. You ran, he said finally. In Syria, when everything fell apart, you ran. I'm sorry. The words were inadequate, pathetic, nothing compared to the weight of what she was apologizing for. I should have stayed. I should have fought. I should have died with the rest of you. If you had stayed, you would have died. And then no one would have survived. No one would have been left to remember us, to carry our story, to make sure our deaths meant something. Kate looked up at him, confusion mixing with her grief. But I didn't do any of those things. I hid. I ran away to Montana and pretended the past didn't exist. I abandoned you. You survived. That's not the same as abandoning. Thomas squeezed her hands with surprising strength. Katie, I've had 8 years to think about what happened in Syria. 8 years of pain and darkness and questions that had no answers. And you know what I realized? She shook her head, unable to speak. I realized that survival is its own form of courage. The world tells us that heroes die fighting, that the greatest sacrifice is giving your life for your comrades. But sometimes the greater sacrifice is living. Living with the guilt, living with the memories, living when everyone you love is gone. His voice softened. You carried us, Kate, all 11 of us. You carried us in your heart for 8 years and that weight nearly broke you. But you didn't let it. You kept going. You survived. And now you're here trying to make things right. I don't know how to make things right. I don't know if it's possible. It's possible. It has to be. Otherwise, what was any of it for? A sound from the doorway made both of them turn. Victor Cross stood there, a pistol in his hand, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Behind him, Kate could hear the distant sounds of movement, of men taking positions, of the final pieces of a deadly game being placed on the board. Touching, Victor said, truly. A reunion 8 years in the making. I almost hate to interrupt. Kate rose to her feet, placing herself between Victor and Thomas. Her hand moved toward her rifle, but Victor raised his pistol in warning. Don't. I have no desire to kill either of you, but I will if you force my hand. Then what do you want, Victor? You brought me here. You showed me Thomas was alive. What's the end game? Victor stepped into the room, his eyes moving from Kate to Thomas and back again. The end game is the same as it's always been. Morrison's exposure, justice for our fallen friends, the truth finally spoken after 8 years of lies. And you think killing hostages is the way to achieve that? I think killing hostages is a last resort I have been trying to avoid. Victor's voice carried a weariness that Kate had not heard before. Do you know how many times I've tried to expose Morrison through legitimate channels? How many journalists have been silenced? How many witnesses have disappeared? How many investigations have been shut down before they could begin? He moved to the window and looked out at the gray dawn breaking over the ruins of Detroit. The system is designed to protect men like Morrison. It's designed to ensure that the powerful never face consequences for their crimes. I've spent 8 years fighting that system, and I've accomplished nothing. Less than nothing. Morrison is more powerful now than he was when he murdered our team. So you decided to become a terrorist. I decided to become effective. Victor turned back to face her. In 2 hours, I'm going to broadcast Senator Morrison's confession to every news outlet in the world. He's going to admit that his father-in-law sold out Phantom Edge for $2 billion in arms contracts. He's going to name names, provide details, Give the world proof that cannot be ignored or buried. And if he refuses to confess, Victor's expression hardened. Then I'll give him motivation, one hostage at a time until he talks. Kate felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had come here hoping to find another way, hoping to save everyone, hoping that somehow the darkness could be turned back without more blood being spilled. But Victor had made his choice. He had committed himself to a path that led only to death and destruction. And yet, there was something in his eyes that spoke of doubt, something beneath the hardness that whispered of a man who was not entirely lost. Victor Cross had been her friend once, her partner, the closest thing to a brother she had ever known. That man was still in there somewhere, buried under layers of pain and rage and 8 years of fighting a war he could not win. Kate had to find him. She had to reach through the darkness and pull him back into the light. It was the only way anyone survived this night. There's another option, she said slowly. One you haven't considered. I've considered every option, Kate. I've had 8 years to plan this. Not this one. Kate reached into her pocket and pulled out the flash drive Webb had given her. Julian Mercer, the journalist. I talked to him tonight. He's been investigating Morrison for years, gathering evidence, building a case. He's willing to publish everything, Victor. Everything you have, everything Thomas knows, everything that can prove Morrison's guilt. Journalism. Victor's voice dripped with contempt. We've been over this. Journalists can't touch Morrison. This one can. He's not like the others. He doesn't answer to corporate boards or political donors. He's independent, fearless, and he has a platform that reaches millions of people. Kate held up the flash drive. All we have to do is give him the evidence. No hostages, no executions, no blood on our hands, just the truth, spoken to a world that's ready to listen. Victor stared at the flash drive for a long moment. Kate could see the conflict in his eyes, the war between hope and cynicism, between the man he had been and the monster he had become. And if it doesn't work, if Morrison's friends bury the story like they've buried everything else, then we find another way. We keep fighting, but we fight without becoming the very thing we oppose. Kate stepped closer, her voice softening. Victor, you told me earlier that something broke inside you in Syria. Something you don't know how to fix. Let me help you fix it. Let me show you that there's still a path forward that doesn't end in destruction. Victor was silent. The factory creaked around them, settling into its decay, bearing witness to a confrontation that would determine the fate of everyone within its walls. Thomas spoke from his wheelchair, his voice quiet but firm. Vic, listen to her. Victor turned to look at his old teammate, surprise flickering across his features. You're taking her side? I'm taking the side of the 11 people who died in Syria. The side of the men and women who believed in something bigger than themselves, who gave their lives for a country that betrayed them. Thomas wheeled himself closer, his eyes never leaving Victor's face. What would they want, Vic? If Sarah were here, if Michael were here, if any of them could speak to us right now, what would they tell us to do? They'd want justice. They'd want peace. Thomas's voice cracked with emotion. They'd want the killing to stop. They were soldiers, yes, but they were also human beings with families and dreams and hopes for the future. They didn't die so that more people could die. They died because a corrupt man valued money over loyalty. And the answer to that corruption isn't more corruption. It's truth. It's exposure. It's making sure the world knows what Morrison did and letting the world decide his punishment. Victor's hand trembled. The pistol wavered in his grip. I don't know if I can stop, he whispered. I've been fighting for so long. I don't know who I am anymore without the fight. Then let us help you find out. Kate reached out and gently lowered his pistol hand. You're not a monster, Victor. You're a soldier who lost his way. We all lose our way sometimes. What matters is finding the path back. For a long moment, no one moved. The gray light of dawn crept through the broken windows, illuminating the faces of 3 soldiers who had survived the unsurvivable, who had carried wounds that would never fully heal, who now stood at a crossroads that would define the rest of their lives. Victor closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something had changed. The hardness was still there, the pain, the rage. But beneath it all, Kate saw something she had not seen since Syria. Hope. The broadcast, Victor said slowly. I have equipment set up in the main manufacturing area. Cameras, satellite uplinks, everything needed to transmit to every major network simultaneously. If we're going to do this, if we're going to try your way, we need to move fast. The hostages? I'll order my men to stand down, but Kate, Victor met her eyes. If this doesn't work, if Morrison buries this like he's buried everything else, I need you to promise me something. What? Promise me you won't stop. Promise me you'll keep fighting until Morrison pays for what he did. Not through violence, not through terror, but through whatever means are necessary to bring him down. Promise me our friends didn't die for nothing. Kate took his hand, the same hand that had helped pull her through 6 weeks of hell at Phantom Edge Selection, the same hand that had steadied her aim during their first real operation together. I promise. Victor nodded slowly. Then he keyed his radio and spoke words that changed everything. All units, this is Cross. Stand down. I repeat, stand down. Release the hostages and prepare for extraction. Operation is canceled. Static. Then confused voices asking for clarification, questioning orders that contradicted everything they had been told. I said, stand down. Victor's voice brooked no argument. Anyone who doesn't comply answers to me personally. And trust me, you don't want that. The radio fell silent. Kate heard movement throughout the building, the sounds of men lowering weapons and stepping back from positions they had held for hours. The tension that had gripped the factory began to ease, replaced by a different kind of energy, the energy of possibility. The senator, Kate said, we need him for the broadcast. He's being held on the second floor. My men will bring him up. Victor paused. But Kate, there's something you should know. The senator has already agreed to confess. I didn't have to threaten him or torture him. I just showed him the evidence of what his father-in-law did, and he broke. He's been carrying this secret for 15 years, and it's been destroying him. He knew? All along, he knew what Morrison did? He suspected, but he didn't want to believe it. He told himself that Morrison was a patriot, that whatever happened in Syria must have been justified, that the ends justified the means. Victor's voice carried a note of bitter satisfaction. I showed him the faces of the people who died. I made him look at photographs of Thomas before and after his captivity, and something inside him cracked. He's ready to talk, Kate. He's been ready for years. He just needed someone to give him permission. The broadcast room had been set up with military precision. Cameras positioned for optimal angles. Lights arranged to create the stark, confessional atmosphere that would lend weight to the words about to be spoken. A satellite uplink that could reach every major network on the planet, bypassing the gatekeepers who had protected Morrison for so long. Senator David Morrison sat in a chair at the center of the room, his face pale, his hands trembling, his eyes carrying the weight of a secret he had kept for too long. He was 52 years old, distinguished looking in the way that politicians cultivated. But beneath the polish was a man who had sold his soul years ago and was only now realizing the price. Kate stood behind the cameras watching as Victor made the final preparations. Thomas had been wheeled into the room, his presence a silent accusation that spoke louder than any words. The other hostages had been released, streaming out of the building into the arms of waiting Marines who could not quite believe what was happening. We're ready, Victor said. Senator, whenever you are. Morrison looked up at the camera, at the red light that indicated the world was watching, at the faces of the people he had helped destroy. For a moment, Kate thought he might refuse, might reclaim the lies that had sustained him for so long. Then he began to speak. My name is David Morrison. I am a United States Senator from the state of Virginia, and I am here to confess to my role in the murder of 11 American soldiers. The words poured out of him like water from a broken dam. The deals his father-in-law had made with arms brokers who had connections to terrorist networks. The intelligence that had been sold to the enemy in exchange for billions of dollars in weapons contracts. The cover-up that had followed, the witnesses who had been silenced, the investigations that had been buried, the lies that had been told to protect the guilty. He named names, Morrison himself, of course, but also others. Generals and politicians and intelligence officials who had known what was happening and done nothing to stop it. A conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government, that had sacrificed American lives for profit and power. And through it all, Thomas Rivera sat in his wheelchair and watched, the living proof of everything the senator was saying. The man who had survived the unsurvivable, who had endured years of torture and captivity, who now bore witness to the truth that had nearly died with him. When Morrison finished, the silence was absolute. The cameras continued to roll, transmitting his confession to a world that would never be the same. Kate stepped forward and looked directly into the lens. She had never been comfortable with cameras, had always preferred the anonymity of the sniper's perch to the exposure of public attention. But this moment demanded visibility. This moment demanded that she step out of the shadows and speak truth to power. My name is Catherine Harlow, Master Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, retired. I served my country for 30 years, in places whose names I cannot speak, doing things that will never appear in any history book. I was the team leader of Operation Phantom Edge, and I am the other survivor of the ambush that killed my friends. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the millions of people who were watching. For 8 years, I blamed myself for what happened in Syria. I believed that I had failed, that I should have died with my team, that my survival was a betrayal of everything I stood for. I carried the names of 11 dead Americans in my heart, and I let that weight crush me into silence and isolation. Her voice strengthened, finding the conviction that had eluded her for so long. Today, I learned the truth. My team was not killed by enemy action. They were murdered by their own government, sacrificed for money by men who wore the same uniform, who swore the same oaths, who were supposed to protect them. General Harrison Morrison ordered the deaths of 11 American heroes, and he has never faced justice for that crime. She paused, letting the words sink in. Until now, the evidence you have heard today, the confession you've witnessed, is only the beginning. In the coming days, more information will be released. Documentation, testimony, proof that cannot be denied or buried. General Morrison will face the consequences of his actions, and the men and women who helped him cover up those actions will face consequences of their own. Kate looked at Victor, who stood just outside the camera's view. He nodded slightly, an acknowledgement of what she had done, of the choice she had made, of the path they were now walking together. In that nod was forgiveness and gratitude, and something that looked almost like peace. This is not revenge, Kate continued, turning back to the camera. This is not terrorism or vigilante justice. This is the truth, finally spoken after 8 years of lies. And the truth, as difficult as it is to hear, is the only foundation on which real justice can be built. She thought of the 11 faces that had haunted her dreams. Thomas Rivera, who sat behind her bearing witness. Sarah Chen, who had wanted to be a doctor. Michael Kowalski, who had dreamed of opening a bar in Chicago. James Patterson, Maria Santos, David Kim, Robert Thompson, Lisa Martinez, William Chen, Angela Davis, Christopher Brown. 11 names, 11 lives, 11 stories that had ended too soon. To my fallen teammates, Kate said, her voice cracking slightly, I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to seek the truth sooner, but I promise you now, in front of the world, that your sacrifice will not be forgotten. Your names will be remembered, and the man who took you from us will finally face justice. She reached forward and switched off the camera. It was over. The aftermath unfolded like a dream. Marines stormed the building, but there was nothing left to storm. Victor's men had surrendered, laying down their weapons and allowing themselves to be taken into custody without resistance. The remaining hostages were evacuated, checked by medics, reunited with families who had spent the night fearing the worst. Victor Cross was arrested, his hands cuffed behind his back, his face expressionless as he was led away by armed guards. But before they took him, he stopped in front of Kate and spoke words that only she could hear. Thank you for reminding me who I used to be. Kate watched him go, feeling the weight of everything they had lost and everything they might yet save. Lieutenant Commander Shaw found her standing alone in the gray light of morning, looking out over the ruins of the Packard district. The sun was rising behind the clouds, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed to mock the darkness that had filled the night. Hell of a thing, Shaw said, standing beside her. I've been in the Marines for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like what happened tonight. Neither have I. The broadcast is everywhere, every network, every website, every social media platform. People are calling it the biggest government scandal in American history. Good, it should be. Shaw was quiet for a moment. What happens now? To Victor, to the senator, to everyone involved in this conspiracy? The justice system happens. Trials, testimony, evidence presented before judges and juries. The way it should have been from the beginning. Kate turned to face him. I know Victor did terrible things tonight. I know Marines died because of his actions. But he also gave us something we might never have had otherwise. The truth. And that truth is going to bring down everyone who helped Morrison cover up what he did. You sound almost grateful. I'm not grateful. I'm just realistic. Victor was a good man once, a hero who served his country with honor and distinction. What happened to him, what broke him, was not his fault. It was the fault of people who betrayed everything they were supposed to stand for. And now those people are going to pay. Shaw nodded slowly. What about you? What happens to Master Sergeant Kate Harlow after all this? Kate smiled, the first genuine smile she had allowed herself in 8 years. I go home, I rest, and then I start the work of rebuilding. Rebuilding what? Everything. 3 months later, Kate sat on the porch of her cabin in Montana and watched the snow fall. The mountains rose around her, their peaks white against a steel-gray sky, their silence a balm for a soul that had known too much noise. She had built this place with her own hands years ago, a refuge from a world that demanded too much and gave too little in return. The logs had come from trees she felled herself. The foundation had been poured with concrete she mixed by hand. Every nail, every board, every shingle represented hours of labor that had helped her forget, at least temporarily, the weight she carried. For 8 years, this cabin had been her prison. A beautiful prison surrounded by mountains and forests and wildlife that knew nothing of human cruelty, but a prison nonetheless. She had locked herself away from the world, convinced that she deserved the isolation, convinced that the ghost of Syria would follow her wherever she went. Now it felt like a beginning. The same walls that had trapped her now welcomed her home. The same silence that had tormented her now offered peace. Something had shifted in Detroit, something fundamental, something that had freed her from chains she had not even known she was wearing. A car came up the long driveway, its tires crunching through fresh snow. Kate watched it approach without concern. She knew who it was. She had been expecting him. Danny Reeves stepped out of the driver's seat, dressed in civilian clothes that looked strange on his young frame. He had been discharged from the Marines 2 weeks ago, an honorable separation that had come with the kind of recommendations that would open doors for the rest of his life. His commanding officers had written glowing letters about his courage under fire, his dedication to his teammates, his growth from a frightened recruit into a capable Marine. Kate had written a letter too. She had described what she had seen in him during the long night in Detroit, the potential, the character, the raw material that could be shaped into something extraordinary with the right guidance. Ma'am. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, uncertain of his welcome. The snow dusted his shoulders and hair, making him look even younger than his 19 years. Danny, come on up. There's coffee inside. They sat in Kate's small living room, warming their hands on mugs of coffee that steamed in the cold air. The cabin was simple, furnished with pieces Kate had built herself over the years. No television, no computer, no connection to the outside world, except for a radio that she rarely turned on. I heard about the trial, Reeves said. General Morrison. They say he's going to prison for the rest of his life. That's what they say, along with 14 other people who helped him cover up what he did. Kate sipped her coffee. The senator cut a deal. He's testifying against everyone in exchange for a reduced sentence. Apparently, confession is good for the soul. And Victor? Kate was silent for a moment. 25 years. He pled guilty to all charges, refused to let his lawyers argue for leniency. She paused. He told the judge that he deserved to be punished for what he did, that the lives he took could never be justified, no matter how righteous his cause might have been. That's a hell of a long time. He'll be eligible for parole in 15 years. He'll be in his 70s by then, but he'll still be alive, still have a chance at something resembling a life. Kate set down her coffee. It's more than a lot of people got. Reeves nodded slowly. What about the other one, Thomas Rivera? Ghost. Kate smiled at the name. He's in a VA hospital in Tennessee, getting the treatment he should have received 8 years ago. His legs are gone, but his spirit is intact. He's talking about writing a book, telling the story of Phantom Edge and what really happened in Syria. I told him I'd help. You do that? Relive all of it? Some stories need to be told. Even the painful ones. Especially the painful ones. Kate looked at the young man sitting across from her, at the determination in his eyes that reminded her so much of herself at that age. What about you, Danny? What brings you all the way out to Montana in the middle of winter? Reeves set down his coffee and met her gaze directly. I've been thinking about what you said that night in Detroit, about my grandfather, about legacy, about becoming something worthy of the people who came before us. And? And I've decided I want to learn, really learn, not just the shooting and the tactics, but all of it. The thinking, the planning, the way you see the world. You told me that the gun is just a tool, that what matters is the mind behind it. I want to develop that mind. Kate studied him for a long moment. She saw the hunger in his eyes, the same hunger she had felt at his age, the drive to become something more than ordinary. She also saw the dangers that came with that hunger, the ways it could be twisted and corrupted by the wrong influences. But she saw something else too, something that made her believe this young man might be different, a moral compass that pointed true, a sense of right and wrong that could survive the darkest challenges, the same quality that had allowed her to pull Victor back from the edge, that had given her the strength to choose truth over vengeance. It's not an easy path, she said finally. The things I could teach you, the skills I could help you develop, they come with responsibilities that never go away. You can't unknow what you learn. You can't unfeel what you feel. Once you start down this road, there's no going back. I understand. Do you? Do you really? Kate leaned forward. I've killed more people than I can count. I've watched friends die in my arms. I've carried guilt that nearly destroyed me and secrets that can never be spoken. Is that the life you want? Reeves did not flinch. My grandfather told me once that there are two kinds of people in the world. People who run from hard things and people who run toward them. He said the second kind are rare and precious and necessary, because without them, the first kind wouldn't have anyone to protect them. He paused. I want to be the second kind. I want to protect people who can't protect themselves. And I think you can teach me how. Kate was silent for a long time. The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in white, covering the scars of the past with a clean slate that promised new beginnings. Finally, she stood and walked to the window. The mountains stretched before her, ancient and enduring, witnesses to countless generations of struggle and survival. Her father had brought her to mountains like these when she was a child, had taught her to shoot on the slopes of the Rockies, had given her the foundation that had shaped the rest of her life. Now it was her turn to pass that gift along. Training starts tomorrow, she said without turning around. 5 a.m., dress warm. We'll begin with the basics and work our way up from there. She heard Reeves rise from his chair, heard the relief and gratitude in his voice when he spoke. Thank you, ma'am. I won't let you down. I know you won't. Kate finally turned to face him. And Danny, call me Kate. We're going to be spending a lot of time together. Might as well start as we mean to go on. Reeves smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him since Detroit. Yes, ma'am, Kate. After he left, Kate remained at the window, watching the snow fall and thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The pain and the loss and the guilt that had defined her for so long. The friends who had died and the friends who had survived. The choices she had made and the choices that still lay ahead. She thought about Victor, sitting in a prison cell somewhere, beginning the long work of atonement. He would never be the man he had been before Syria, but perhaps he could become something else. Something that honored the memory of their fallen teammates while acknowledging the wrongs he had committed in their name. Redemption was a journey, not a destination, and Victor had taken the first steps. She thought about Thomas learning to live again in a world that had forgotten him. He was writing his book now, filling page after page with memories of Phantom Edge and the truth about what had happened in Syria. It would be painful to read, Kate knew, painful to relive, but necessary. Some stories demanded to be told, no matter how much they hurt. She thought about the 11 faces that would haunt her dreams for the rest of her life, the voices that would whisper in the quiet moments, asking questions that had finally been answered. Why did you survive? To bear witness, to carry the truth, to make sure their deaths were not in vain. She thought about Morrison, stripped of his rank and his reputation, facing the judgment of a system he had corrupted for so long. The trial had been broadcast around the world. The evidence had been overwhelming. The verdict had been unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice had come for him at last, not through violence or vengeance, but through the simple, terrible power of truth. And she thought about herself, about the woman she had been and the woman she was becoming. The Specter had faded into legend, a story told in hushed tones by Marines who would never know the full truth. In her place stood something new, something that had been forged in fire and tempered by loss, something that might, with time and effort, help shape the next generation of warriors who would protect the innocent and punish the guilty. Kate Harlow was not the hero of this story. There were no heroes, not really, just people doing the best they could with the tools they had been given, trying to leave the world a little better than they found it. But she was alive, and as long as she was alive, she could keep fighting, keep teaching, keep honoring the memory of 11 people who had deserved so much more than the fate they had received. The snow continued to fall, covering the past, promising the future. Each flake was unique, they said. Each one carried a pattern that would never be repeated, like the lives that had been lost, like the stories that had been silenced, like the truths that had finally been spoken. Kate watched the snow and felt something she had not felt in 8 years. Hope. Not the desperate, fragile hope of someone grasping at straws, but the solid, grounded hope of someone who had walked through fire and come out the other side. She had done what she set out to do. She had honored her fallen friends. She had exposed the man who killed them. And she had found a way to move forward without becoming the thing she fought against. And somewhere in the distance, a new day was beginning. The sun was rising behind the clouds, sending fingers of golden light across the mountain peaks, painting the snow in shades of amber and rose. It was beautiful. Heartbreakingly, impossibly beautiful. The kind of beauty that reminded you why life was worth living, even when living was hard. Kate turned from the window and began to prepare for tomorrow. There was work to be done. There would always be work to be done. But for the first time in 8 years, she was ready to do it. Not as the Specter, not as the ghost of a woman who had lost everything, but as Kate Harlow, survivor, teacher, warrior, and perhaps, in the end, something like a hero after all.